style cuts. So I think it was just we don't houses in the purview of government.
No, Gabby?
I'm just gonna do it.
Oh,
Okay.
Negotiate the contract and they're like, we're not renegotiating. Fine, fine.
Up our city council workshop. This is for July 2nd, 2025. We have a few items to discuss tonight. We'll have the land use code update as a part of a series of updates. Then the 2025 private activity bonds allocation discussion, followed by the Rocky Mountain Metropolitan Airport noise impact discussion, and then conclude with any new ideas that council would like to bring forward at a later meeting. So just want to welcome everybody. Thank you for being with us this evening. We can begin with the first item on our agenda, which is the land use code update.
Good evening, Phil Feisler, City's Planning and Building Department. We're excited to have this conversation with council this evening. So we have our partners who are helping us on this project, Elizabeth with Clarion Associates and Molly with Root Policy Research. And so council may recall that we're rewriting our land use code kind of in three chunks, what we're calling modules. And so we presented module 1 to council in February, module 2 in May, and now we're going to present module 3. Just a fair warning, module 3 has more words and there's a bit more detail because it's just like the nuances with process. And so just going to mention that up front. After that, we'd like to dive into our plan for public engagement this fall, as well as some of the preliminary strategies that we'd like to, or not strategies, topics that we'd like to bring out to the community for their feedback. And then we'll talk through some of the affordable housing components that this project is seeking to at least explore or address. So with that, I can hand it over to Elizabeth.
Thanks, Philip. Good evening, everyone. Okay, so we'll pick up the land use code part. That's me. Affordable housing part. That's Molly. We will be separate for a while, but we always end up running into each other somewhere along the way. So just remind everybody, and dude, you are not selling it when you tell people it has more words. Don't do that. Okay, what are we up to? We're implementing the comprehensive plan. So taking the policies in Legacy Lafayette and turning them into regulations. We are working to make the land use code more user-friendly, and actually this is a section, this module is a place where we're working on doing that, where we're taking people from lots of dense text, moving them to less dense text and more summaries and more information about how to use the regulations. We're working to create more predictable development outcomes. That's across the regulations. And then we're looking at what we say, right-sizing the development review process, and we're going to dig into that just a little bit this evening, so we'll wait for the slides to get to that. Thanks. Okay, so here we are drafting. So we're in the last big chunk of drafting, the third module. When we have comments on this and edits, we'll pull the whole thing together and we'll have a full draft code. And this is what we're going to start talking with the community about. So until now, we've been working with a really great and sometimes feisty working group. We appreciate their input along the way. And we are going to keep talking to them, but we're going to broaden out this conversation. So you can see we're finishing up drafting, kind of got that August deadline in there, and then we have a long period of time where we're talking to the public and we're getting feedback, and we have a couple slides on this later in the presentation, so we'll come back to it. So the overview of Module 3, what are we looking to do here? So we want to streamline approvals. That means matching the review level. So is it review by staff? Is it review by planning commission? Or is it review by city council with the project type, and reserving public hearings for complex cases? We are looking at focusing public input. One of the things that we see in code after code, update after update, is we've all set up our processes so we get critical public input at the very last minute, usually in front of you guys. And that's fine, but there's an and. We could look at getting that input earlier in the project and allowing the applicant the opportunity to think about it and work with it, rather than kind of dealing with it as a problem at the end of the process. Then finally, we have some adjustments that we've made to the regulations that add flexibility. We can write a great code, but we just simply can't anticipate every project that's going to come through to the city. So we put flexibility in the procedures, and that supports practical solutions. Okay, so our organization in this module. So first section is general provisions. That's kind of our boilerplate. First chapter of the code that absolutely nobody reads except city attorney's office. But we like them, so we give them words too. The rest of it, further down in the regulations, is administration and procedures. So we do a summary of the review and decision-making bodies. What does the Zoning Board of Adjustment do? What does City Council do? What does the Planning Director do? We've created a summary table of review procedures. We'll look at that in a minute. Then we have a grouping of common review procedures. It's really high-level stuff like, how do you do a neighborhood meeting? How does staff review an application? So these are things that happen time and again, and we want to just write them down once and put them in one location. Then we have the specific review procedure. So if I want to come in for a variance or a rezoning, what steps am I going through to do that? And then we have the regulations related to nonconformities. So we'll talk about that in detail in a little bit. Okay, so we're about to look at the summary table of review procedures. So this is where we take a lot of text information and we summarize it for staff and for applicants to try to help people navigate this part of the code. So we take a look at what kinds of applications are there, where do you find that information in the code, what do you have to do before you submit, and then what happens when you've submitted. So who reviews it, who decides on it, is public hearing required, and how do you appeal? So let's go to the table. So you can see this is, now this is two pieces of the table. The whole table is about a page and a quarter, but we just took a chunk of it so you could see that we have administrative applications, so we have a few examples in there. Then we have applications requiring a public hearing. We have a few examples in there. So those are your application types in that first column. The required actions are in the columns 2 through the end there. We have the key on the top, so you can figure out what does D stand for, what does A in 2 carats stand for. So if I wanted to come in with a development sketch plan, I could find all of the information about that application in section 26.9 4B4, and that link clicks through, so go into the easy button there. I'm going to need to do a pre-application conference. That's my first check. I'm going to need to do a neighborhood meeting. That's my second check. If I go to the section on neighborhood meeting, it tells me how I set up and organize that meeting. My application is going to get reviewed by planning director, which is inclusive of planning staff. It will be sent to Planning Commission for feedback. This is a sketch plan, so nobody's actually deciding on it, but it will be heard in a public hearing. So this is a place where people, neighbors, or residents can come in and comment on it. Same thing with City Council. And so then I have my feedback on my development sketch plan, and I can move into my next step of the process. So in our common review procedures, a lot of which I summarized there, these are common to most development applications. Right now, they're sometimes repeated, they're sometimes not covered in the regulations, so this helps us get to clarity. We consolidate them in one location so we can avoid repeating them. They're not that interesting, but they're really important. And then we've just rewritten them for clarity. So you can see the list of 7 things. So pre-application conference, neighborhood meetings, how do you submit your application, how does staff do a completeness review? Once it's complete, what kind of review takes place? How do we do the scheduling and notice of public hearings? When the Planning Commission or City Council are looking at it, how does their review work? How do they make a recommendation or decision? And then once the application's been decided on, what opportunities do you have following that decision to maybe seek a rehearing or to make an amendment to it? So we kind of want to go start to finish and cover all of the potential steps along the way. Some of this you may, use once every 5 years, but as long as it's in the code, that makes it easier to find and use. You don't have to make it up as you go. So then in the specific procedures, we do some of the same thing. We organize everything. So you can see in this sign permit application, we have a purpose statement, an applicability section, who can apply for this, what does it apply to, what specific procedures need to be followed, and what are the review criteria. We categorize these specific applications as either administrative, and so that's planning director, planning staff approval, or applications requiring a public hearing, so that could be planning commission or city council approval. That's going to matter for our conversation in a minute. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so this is kind of what we want to focus on this evening. We're trying to make sure that we have the right applications decided by the right body, and it's more than just a legal question, because City Council does have the authority to delegate a variety of decisions to the Planning Commission or to the director and the planning staff. And in order to make the process move more quickly, for those applications that we think should move quickly, we want to move ourselves from City Council to Planning Commission or to planning staff. To the extent that we can make decisions approvable administratively based on criteria that are drafted in the regulations, that is usually the fastest kind of approval. Not that fast is always good, but fast is good when we know what you need to meet, when we don't really need to spend a lot of time thinking about a project because it only impacts its site. It can follow the rules that we wrote in the regulations. And professional staff has the experience and the ability to say, yep, you check all the boxes, or no, you don't. Or they have the experience and the ability to say, this is turning into an issue. We want to send it up to Planning Commission, send it up to City Council. So we've organized these. So Council takes annexation and rezoning, takes the big stuff, the final plat for PUDs, for subdivisions and PUDs and dedications. They take major special uses, major SPARs. It's the site plan review, the site plan and architectural review. Thank you. So we haven't made any changes to that. We have Planning Commission reviewing and deciding on the sketch PUD. Actually, that's the one that gets feedback, and sketch plat. So those are feedback. And then the preliminary PUD and preliminary plat. So the criteria that we put in the Planning Commission column is they apply the land use code to projects with potential community impacts. A little different than City Council. You guys are making policies and decisions with citywide impact. So we want it sent to council if it's a big decision, if it's going to impact the city in some way because of the size, because of the traffic, because of the development, if there are issues around plan compliance. That's all stuff we want going to City Council. If we need to have an opportunity for the public to come in, talk about a project, hear about what's going on, if we potentially have some application of policy to rules, then we're at Planning Commission. And finally, if we can write rules where we're really applying the land use code in accordance with delegated standards, then we're at staff level. It's not always a one-to-one, but we're within that area of, okay, this is staff and this is their purview and these are the instructions they've been given. And this is, best practice if we are looking at how do we take a group of applications and move them through the process. So let's go to the next slide. So some of the updates and changes we want to point out to you are in that category of administrative decision-making. So on the left side, we have the current approvals. So we have an administrative PUD that's applicable to commercial development of less than or equal to 5 acres and up to 100,000 square feet, or residential development of less than or equal to 5 acres and less than 20 dwelling units. So we've kind of recategorized this into major and minor adjustments because that, a PUD should technically be a rezoning. So that's something that should be going to commission. But we can see what's going on here is kind of okay, we're doing this wider site planning process and we have some flexibility here. So we want to give it its correct name in the updated code. And we want to say, we recognize that some applicants are going to ask for a minor amount of changes. In the code, we've said that's up to 10% of a measurable lot or building standard. So if your setback is, 20-foot setback and someone asks for, 10% change, that's 2 feet in one direction or another. So, and it kind of falls in the minor category. We are also recommending a major adjustment, and that is going to go up to either Planning Commission or City Council. That's more of a 25% adjustment. So now we're talking measurement, and we want you guys to be able to see what's going on with that. But this minor category is, an applicant needs to lose one parking space, and they're going to get their restaurant open. Or, they need some part of their fabulous building to extend, 2 feet into the setback, and that's not necessarily something we want to take to council. It should be something where we're like, okay, we want this use to open, we're excited about it, we have put it in staff's hands to do the right things here, and we've given them a few standards to look at to get there. So that's going to change to major and minor adjustment. We do now have an administrative special use. So one of the first things we do when we start updating a code, and we talked about this early on, is we go through the uses and we move uses out of special use review. That they just accumulate over time because people are like, I don't know, let's just look at, sports arenas every time they come through. Well, maybe sports arenas you want to look at every time they come through. But, if someone wants to, put something up in their backyard and we can write the standards that go with it, there's no reason for that to go through special review. It can be approved consistently. So we're changing some of those to just be, it's a permitted use. We've got the regulations, we're good. We're taking administrative SPAR and renaming that minor SPAR. We're following this major, minor through the regulations. It's something that resonates with folks that aren't really going to be clear about what's administrative, what's legislative. So we want to use more common language for that. So our recommendations on minor SPAR are, we've expanded it somewhat. So it's the existing administrative SPAR, so residential of less than 5 dwelling units plus site improvements, and we've changed that up to also include new non-residential development up to 5,000 square feet of gross floor area, and residential and non-residential expansions and alterations up to 4 units or up to 2,500 square feet or 25% of existing gross floor area. So those are still kind of daily, run-of-the-mill changes. Something's already going on the site. We're not going to have the neighbors panicking most of the time. Some neighbors are going to panic. But for the most part, this is change that's in keeping with what's going on the site, and so we want to go through a minor process to do that. We've added in a land use code interpretation. The city has always had the authority to do land use code interpretation. It just wasn't clear in the current regulations, and so there's a process in there. Planning director interprets the code. If someone wants to challenge that interpretation, it goes to ZBA. So that's just a straight up administrative decision, keeping minor subdivision the way it is. Have added a process for final plat. Final plat can be approved administratively, but dedications of property will still go to the city council, and vested rights will still be a separate process. So that does not get rolled into final plat. And then finally, you'll see in the draft that we've added some permits to clarify. This is not necessarily new permits, but we're just clarifying that there are permits that get approved. A permit for change of use, a permit for floodplains, permit for signs, and a permit for temporary uses. So we've got some review criteria for that. And now if I come in and I want to, I've got a parcel and I'm going to build on it eventually, but I want a temporary office on it while I'm getting set up, I have a straight line to go through to get my temporary use approved. So last up, nonconformities. So this is the section that says, hey, if you have something on the ground that existed prior to this code being adopted and was legal, or even prior to the 1986 code, the current code being adopted and it was legal, it stays legal. We just call it a nonconformity. And so this is rules about how a nonconformity stays legal and how it might lose its status. Usually that's just through abandonment, can be through change over time, but to a certain degree, we want to encourage people to keep investing in their property. So we don't want to tighten up nonconformities and say, no, you can't do anything with it. So it kind of takes a light touch. And then it talks about in certain circumstances when you have to bring the site or the structure or the lot into conformance with the regulations. So we've met with our working group and talked about these changes. Some of the conversation, just to keep you guys in the loop, had some good conversation about what is the threshold for the minor SPAR. What is a good place to do administrative review, what qualifies as small scale or minor development projects, and then where's that cutoff? So we make sure we're feeding the bigger projects into Planning Commission and City Council. We've recommended some changes to the planned unit development process. First off, we've recommended a minimum lot area for eligibility. This is kind of moving people away from the idea that, well, I'm just going to start with the PUD and go from there. We really want them to start with base districts. It's easier to change over time. From an administrative perspective, it's way more consistent for the city. And then we've started to identify and define some required community benefits. When someone does a PUD, you are really changing the regulations for them. And the negotiation there is typically, okay, we're going to change the regulations. What are you bringing to the table that benefits Lafayette? So we've got a working list in there, and we've had some conversations with working group about, do we want extra open space, or do we want to encourage someone to go above the affordable housing, 12% goal that the county's looking for, the city's looking for. So, what are we looking for in there? And then finally, we had kind of the same conversation about minor and major adjustments. What are we going to call an adjustment? What's a variance? What goes to PUD? And sort of how do we come up with a clean line between major and minor? We want it to be the same across all of these applications. So there isn't like, well, a minor adjustment includes this, but a minor site plan has these 4 different things, because that's just crazy making for everybody. So we're trying to figure out where those consistencies are. Thank you. Okay, so that was long, and I probably should have stopped in there, so I'll stop now. Is there anything you want to back up to?
It's okay. If you have questions or comments from council? No? Okay. I think we can move forward.
So far, so good?
So far, so
Good. All right, move forward. So let me tell you a little bit about public engagement, getting into the fun stuff. So we're pulling our information together now to get started with public engagement. We've given each month a purpose, and the purpose is to bring people into the process, to help make them feel comfortable about commenting on regulations. It's a weird place that sometimes people are like, I don't know that, it looks like law, why can I say something about it? And so we help them make sense of it. We move into October and November, we're really involving the community in the process. November and December, we're collaborating. We will bump into things that people want to see changed. We anticipate that. We're just never entirely sure what the issues are going to be. But when we get it nailed down and we can say, you know, we've still got this sticking place on neighborhood serving commercial, then we figure out, you know, do we need a focus group for this? Do we need to come up with some alternative regulations? Do we need some guidance from City Council? Where are we going to move this conversation forward? We start moving into adoption and we're circling back to inform. So we're telling people, okay, here's the code that's going into adoption. You will have public hearings. This is your place to show up and say your things. So that's kind of the full circle that we run there. Just getting going in August, we'll start with what we call learning sessions, also listening sessions. So what is zoning? How can you participate? What's going on in the project? What do you need to know about HOAs? What's the relationship between HOAs and zoning? We will have a full version of the draft posted to the project website in September. That means it's publicly available. We know not everyone interacts with it on the website, so we'll take it with us to meetings so people can flip through, can look at it. It will be posted for comment. We will do our very best to let everyone know it's not the final version. We don't want them walking in and saying, you drafted it without me. No, this is terrible. We want to say, okay, we needed to come this far so you have something to respond to. And now we're inviting you, please come in and talk to us. Once that's going, we'll do open houses, we'll do virtual listening sessions. We have an interactive zoning map. We know people, it slides back and forth between here and there. People like maps. And it also helps people identify their biggest question, what are you doing to my property? So we'll also do some focus groups and some coffee chats. And then we'll start building our engagement report. We'll summarize the information. That'll be public also, so people can see what other people are saying. We want to know what the neighbors are saying and then agree or disagree. I think we've talked about this before. We find that people can have very strong disagreements and still be generally polite. We haven't had any knockdown dragouts over zoning, so we'll assume the best of everybody. And we'll kind of put it all out there and take the conversation. Let's do the next one. So we wanted to let you know what some of our discussion topics are going to be. And just for this evening's purposes, we're kind of in a yes-no place. If we come to any particular questions and you feel like, yeah, we might not be ready to take that out to the community, we're not entirely sure where we want to go, we want to hold it for conversation, let us know, we'll pull it off. Otherwise, our plan is to ask these questions in as many ways as we can get away with and see what kind of answers we get and bring that back to you. So we've got the draft language and the input that we're getting, and then we can decide if we're going to go with it or change it. So first question, so all of these out of Module 1, this is zoning districts and uses. So we want to ask the community, do we want to allow duplexes, 2 units, triplexes, 3 units, and townhomes up to 4 units, some cases limited to 3, to be developed in existing neighborhoods. And then could there be rules about the location, the design, or the scale? Same question about the neighborhood serving commercial. So this was the flower shop or the coffee shop that we might have in a converted residential space. And so, you know, what does the community think about that? And then finally, we're looking at making some revisions to the city's current ADU requirements. These revisions would be expansive, so they would potentially make it easier to put ADUs on some properties, and it would speak a little more to the size and location. So you've already kind of had round 1 under control. Do we want to move into round 2? So let's stop there. Yeah. Anything in here uncomfortable? Or are you okay getting feedback on this, and then we'll decide what our next steps are based on what we hear?
Thank you. Thoughts of council? Any issues or clarifying points?
One question.
Yes.
Oh, do I not have a microphone? Hilarious.
Now you do.
One question about revising the ADU requirements. Things like this, are we doing targeted outreach for who we're hoping to hear from? Because obviously, if we just go citywide, we might get some. But if we target the people who've already done an ADU and gone through the current requirements, they might have a better answer as to what's missing in order to
Yeah,
streamline that
that's a
process.
great idea. We can pull that together as a focus group.
Yeah, and one of the ideas we've tossed around a little bit is to do mailers to all of we have the permit information addresses. So asking them to come to a webinar or do a survey, asking kind of how was the experience, what were the roadblocks, what are you renting yours out now? So thinking about affordability, because that'll probably tie into some of the other affordable housing projects that we're working on as well. So.
Amazing. That was my only question. Thank you.
Cool.
Okay, anything else, Councilor Sampson?
Yeah, I'm wondering about the neighborhood serving commercial. You brought up 2 examples, and to me, those are heavy traffic. Is this more of a broader question? So there's a lot of people working from home and have decided to just move into consulting.
Yeah.
Is that really kind of, because it's very different from an architect who is working from his or her home, providing those documents out, than it is a flower shop.
Yeah, so what we're looking for here is more of the walkable in the neighborhood experience. So not, unless they have the best flowers or best coffee in the city, it's more intended to be something like I'm working at home, want to pack it up, and I want someone else to make coffee or make a cookie for me or something along those lines. So it's something that we're seeing pop up in other communities, and because Lafayette is so walkable, it may well be something that survives well here. So to get to your concern, though, some of our questions are, do we allow parking? Do we keep the footprint really small? So with working group, we talked about 2,000 square feet. So it's a fairly small coffee shop. Do we say it has to be located on a corner, or maybe it has to even be located on a collector or an arterial? So those are all the things that we kind of want to test out there. Like, do you like the idea? Do you like the idea if we put some bumpers on it? Do you just hate the idea? And so that's the feedback we bring back to you about how people, would be like, great, I need someone else making my coffee, or no, I just think that's going to make the neighborhood feel really different.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you're really not, my question was more about, how far are you going with that? Or are you really thinking about these are places that people are coming to visit?
Yeah, these are places that people would come to. So
Okay.
like the whole I'm consulting at home thing, that's kind of a home occupation. So that's handled, that's okay. And so this is like one step beyond that. So yeah, you're bringing people into the business, you may have some traffic, you may not have traffic, and those are the parameters that we're trying to understand. Like, is there a place where this is acceptable? Is it acceptable in some neighborhoods but not in others? Because it
Right.
doesn't necessarily have to be one size fits all regulations. So,
Yep.
Some places might say, fabulous, give us that, and other neighborhoods would be like, no, we don't want it.
Yeah, I think we're going to have, just as I'm asking, I think we're going to have some more descriptors on it, because it's different from an artist who creates art out of his or her home and then has a lot, they're shipping it out a lot, right?
Yep.
And may have some people come in for a showing, but it's not a coffee shop. So there's very different elements. There's different types of businesses.
Yeah,
and different
there's
types
kind of a
impacts.
continuum,
Uh-huh.
of what you're
Yep.
saying. Like, me or you working at home, I don't even have I have Amazon every now and then, but that's probably not for my business. But, if I were, selling something from home and doing some shipping, that would be a step up. If I had an employee or two, that might be a step up. Maybe I'm running, like a beauty salon or a nail place, and now I've really got some traffic going, and we're kind of moving beyond that. And that can be part of the questioning that we do. Like, okay, here's the whole continuum. Put the dot where you're comfortable. Right? Tell us what you think for your neighborhood and for the city.
Right, because a counselor could actually work out of his or her home, and you might never know because
Sure.
of the way they've scheduled people coming in.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we'll ask that one broadly and bring the information back to everybody to talk about.
Great. Anything else for this portion? No? Okay. Good.
We have a few more of these.
We got a lot more. Some of them we're going to go through pretty quickly, though. So this is Module 2. We talked about this a little bit at our last get-together. This is all of the technical stuff. So this is wildlife and parking and lighting and any kind of development might have some rules hiding in here. So one of the first places we're looking is getting some feedback on potentially creating a buffer around water bodies. The city uses, you use your floodplain regulations pretty well. And we're thinking there may be one or two situations where someone is, next to something that's classified as a water body where floodplain doesn't apply. We want to know kind of if there's a situation where we want to say new development or redevelopment needs to stay X feet away from the water, because when we keep you away from the water, that helps the land between you and the water function in the case of flood. You've not covered it with impervious surface, it's going to absorb some. So this is, just to see, is there anything out there or, that we would need to buffer? Do we have this going? Kind of same question about areas of significant natural resources or identified wildlife habitat. So this comes out of the city's wildlife plan. And trying to go from that policy level to put it on the ground, thinking about, okay, if you're in habitat area, are the rules going to say you can't develop that part of your property? And to what extent are we going to say that? So let's do the next one. Thinking about as development and redevelopment takes place, making sure that we are incorporating safe access and circulation systems for cars, people, and bicycles internally and then connecting externally. So just, making sure that the community's on board with this requirement that new development's going to connect. So you can keep walking where you're going or riding where you're going. And then adding minimum bike parking standards. Now this is particularly focused. This is new standards for, I believe, long and short-term bike parking for multi-household dwellings, multi-family dwellings, food and beverage services, recreation, and entertainment, places where people are likely to ride their bikes and potentially park them for a period of time or overnight. So, if you work somewhere and you are a bike commuter, are we giving you the right infrastructure that you need? What we hear from bicyclists all the time is that's, chicken and egg problem. If the infrastructure's not there, I can't ride. Someone's going to steal my bike and that's my only mode of transportation. I got problems. So we're checking on that. And then finally, right sizing, minimum parking requirements. So you guys may have had this discussion. Minimum parking requirements are more art than science. It's, we've got years of math behind us, but we're always looking for that place where parking is not necessarily taking up places that people need. So are we using parking to take up things that we could build affordable housing on? Are we using parking and we have Target parked for Christmas Eve, which is their max parking day? And do they actually need that? So city's in pretty good shape with the parking, but we're kind of looking across everything and moving it up and moving it down. And what we want to hear from people is, what are your strong feelings about parking or lack thereof? And bring that back for discussion. And then finally, establishing a basic set of outdoor lighting standards that address and minimize light pollution. So we're not going dark sky. It's not what we've heard from the city, but we are saying you're going to shield your lighting and you're not going to have light pollution or light trespass above the lights. So that helps us see the night sky. We don't bump into safety problems or anything along those lines. It's just like, keep your light to yourself. So anything on this list that you guys want to talk about?
I was just wondering, some of these are very specific. When you do the discussion, are you planning to give authentic examples of where these apply?
So we're not going to give authentic Lafayette examples, but we can give some basic examples to people. We do have the wildlife map. I mean, so we can pull that up and say, could apply here, but we never know who's sitting with us and they might own that property that we're saying, well, this is going to be a fabulous place for, jackrabbits and no development whatsoever. We don't want to get in that position, but we do want to say, what I was going to bring up, the flip side of this question is, we will be impacting people's potential to develop with some of these changes, right? All of a sudden you thought you had your whole parcel and now you've lost a chunk of it because you have, intermittent wetlands or you have, some sort of wildlife. So what we want to get at with these questions is kind of the level of support for making these changes, knowing that it's going to send people to council saying, wait a minute, I bought this property, I thought I could develop it. And letting people know that as we take the policies that get adopted into the plans, this is what they look like when they turn into regulations. And that gives us a chance to either say, yep, we nailed it, or to start making reasonable adjustments to say, okay, you know what, if you're right outside of Old Town and you're in something that looks like a wildlife corridor and actually looks like a parking lot in real life, we may not apply the rules the same way to you as we do to someone that's really on the outskirts of the city that has that open land. Did that answer your question?
Yes, and it does for the first part. And then when we're talking about incorporating safe access and circulation systems for cars, pedestrian, and bicycles, not sure people understand a lot about the things they haven't done. Like pedestrians are going to experience, if you haven't actually tried to walk along 287 or, bike on, they might be fixing it. But there's places where these would directly apply. The minimum parking standards for, I'm not going to name anybody, but there are places
Yeah,
where,
no, I think that's so for most of these, when we show up to talk to people, we definitely come with photos and maps.
Oh, you would for those?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, well,
I'm
that I was
sorry.
wondering.
Yeah, no, we don't want anyone to imagine it because they don't work at the level that you do on this stuff. Like you've seen it 50 or 100 times. But no, we're like, hey, this is a circulation plan. Here's how people walk around. Here's how bikes walk around, drive around. This is something that we would ask developers to do. It would provide these
And
connections.
you can apply that to places in Lafayette?
Well, if we have some existing that have already gone through the process, that's our best bet.
Mhm.
But if not the case, we'll probably mock up an imaginary site and say, if you're, we could probably pull a chunk off a parking lot and say, okay, if this got redeveloped, here's what we would see in terms of connectivity.
Okay.
Here's what we'd see in terms of wildlife. We'll probably, make the imaginary spot with all problems associated with it, and then let people work through, okay, what does it mean? And is this, where we want to end up with this?
That'd be great, because I think sometimes it's hard for people to reimagine things they've seen for 30 years. Like,
It's hard to see change, right?
it's hard to see change.
Yeah, so yeah, we definitely want to put the visuals in front of them to help them get there. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
I just have a question about number 5, specifically identified wildlife habitat. Are we thinking specifically about endangered species or any wildlife? And then would the standards in place be different for large developers versus small business owners?
So the way we've drafted it now is pretty generally applicable. What we say is, if you are in a mapped wildlife area, so coming out of the wildlife plan, we are going to talk about what that means in terms of how your development gets designed. For whatever properties didn't end up mapped, I think there are a few that didn't end up mapped, not a ton. Well, yeah. We have a process that says you need to do a wildlife habitat study and bring it in with your application. We haven't taken that next step that you're contemplating. What are our offsets, right? So, if we come in and we've got somebody that's, essentially going to be prohibited from developing on 75 or 80% of their property? Is this a place where we need to adjust the regulations? And what does that look like? And so right now, the way it's set up is pretty broadly applicable. And that's something, we'll point out during this process, and we'll ask people, should it apply differently to a mom and pop business owner? Should it apply differently, in situations where we already have a really built out part of the community? We'll ask people, where they think it should apply completely or apply differently. Usually we do an open-ended, leave us your comments and your thoughts about this.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
I think seeing these questions, I think our open space board and our sustainability resiliency board, and I'm sure other boards would be interested in being involved in these conversations. I know they've had representatives on the working groups, right?
Yeah.
Are there plans to go back to those boards in this phase to talk to them?
Yep, we went to the Open Space Board last month, I think it was, or maybe it was the month before, specifically on the wildlife things that were just mentioned. But that's something that the members of the working group also suggested as well. So
Great.
I think we're going to be making some trips, having a road show in the near future.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we have a third.
Okay.
Just one more.
Last group, last question. So the last thing that we want to get some feedback about is the slide that we spent some time on earlier about the number of things that the consultant team has teed up for administrative review. And some of the things already go through administrative review, but we do want to let people know that, one way to shorten up the approval process is to make these changes, and to also make this change of, which it's not a huge change here, you guys do it pretty well, but saying, let's get our community input in early, and talk about how that needs to take place. So, one of the things we know about development is the longer we're in the approval process, the more expensive it is for the applicant. That's, particularly important with affordable housing, but it's really important for a lot of different projects. And so one of the things that we want to try to grab hold of and say, this is a really effective way to do this is moving things to administrative approval. When we do that, though, we hear concern from people. If we're making changes, people get concerned, and they're worried that all of a sudden this means that that coffee shop they didn't want, staff's going to approve it. And so what we want to hear about is what would be your concerns with these changes. What could we do to show you that if we are moving something to administrative review, Planning Commission can still see it in some circumstances, City Council can still see it in some circumstances. One of the things that we found at Clarion is we make this change, people are, really concerned about it for a few months. They want stuff to go to council for about a year, and then they're like, yeah, whatever, and they move on to their next thing. But we don't want to skip that year. It's important to help people kind of work through and filter that change. So, we want to let people know, hey, here are some of the changes we're making. Here's why. Tell us what you're thinking. That's it. That's the only one on that one. So, does that sound okay to you guys?
Yeah, I think it's important to, through all these discussions, to also make sure you're asking questions regarding fire, their role in the development process when it
Okay.
comes to, the development, getting their COs and things like that, and working with that department, in addition to the planning department, to make sure they're compliant and all those factors, because I know a lot of times that can hold people up as well.
I think it's a good point, and I'm just picturing, what you're saying. Not everybody knows how the rest of the city's departments get involved. So maybe in some of our early, like zoning 101, we can say who's included in the approval process, and then we can carry that through so people know fire's having their say and engineering's having their say. And, just because something is going through administratively, that doesn't mean it's not getting the technical review it needs.
Yes. Yeah, I think,
Yeah.
asking residents and folks that have collaborated with the city, about that process as well is important
Okay.
to get that feedback. Yeah.
I think we've gone through questions. So we could switch gears and get through, start on affordable housing. To do that, we wanted to just provide a couple of context slides quickly, just to talk through really briefly some of the things either we already have in place relating to affordable housing or that we're exploring. So we currently have fee waivers and an impact fee in place. So the fee waivers waive fees for affordable housing projects, whether it be development, review fees, permits, water tap use tax, and we have an impact fee in place right now that's assessed at building permit that goes, and then that money is then used to fund affordable housing projects. There's also a lot of regional collaboration that happens really on a day-to-day basis. So we're part of the Regional Housing Partnership. We're standing up a regional affordable housing compliance program, and we're going after grant funding as a region as well. We were recently successful in that. We also received a grant from the state from Proposition 123 last year, and that's funding part of this work. It's funding Molly's work relating to inclusionary housing incentives, fast track reviews. We're also doing a study of our current impact fee and talking about whether or not that should be adjusted in the future, as well as some internal improvements, because the city actually manages about 20 affordable housing units. And then we're going to be probably looking at expanding that grant use later this year. So in terms of project support, the council's been very supportive of local affordable housing projects. Most recently, Willoughby Corner and La Luna Mountain View. And those have, in particular, Willoughby has really been moving the needle in terms of our unit production. Though there's a question about how to keep up with our housing goals if we don't have that one big project that's happening. And so keeping up as the city grows is kind of what Molly's going to be talking about tonight. One of the things Molly also won't be talking about, but that's part of the project, is a fast track review process. So we've met our Prop 123 commitment for this cycle. And so if we want to commit to the next cycle and be eligible for 3 more years of grant funding, then we would have to adopt a fast track process that would review affordable housing applications within 3 months. So it's something we're exploring as a region, as well as through this code project. Wanted to mention that because it's not necessarily Molly's presentation, but just kind of context.
Yep. Great, thanks. Should I steal your mic? Are we on recording? Okay, perfect. All right. Now I'm double mic'd. Now it's excessive. Great, well, thank you so much. Glad to be here tonight and talking through this. And as Phil said, we're kind of honing in on one or a couple specific types of policies. That doesn't mean it's the only thing you're doing, obviously related to affordable housing. Part of the reason that this in particular topic is paired with the land use is that these are kind of the more regulatory side of some of the affordable housing strategies that are in your strategic plan. So we're looking at kind of those regulatory items in conjunction with the zoning update. So let's go ahead and jump in. So specifically, we're talking about some affordable requirements and incentives. I typically kind of bucket these into sort of 3 different categories. This gets just a little bit jargony and can be a little bit confusing. So I'm just doing a little bit of context. Some of you may be like, I totally understand the difference and we don't need to do this, but I think it's helpful just to make sure we're all kind of using the same terminology as we talk through what these options are. So when we talk about affordable requirements and incentives, we're really looking at policies that are leveraging new development to help deliver those affordable outcomes. So everything we're talking about today is really applying to new development. As Phil said, these are keep-up strategies, not catch-up strategies as we look at those. So the most common strategy within this type is voluntary development incentives. These are the things we commonly just call these incentives. It's basically developers offered different zoning or land use options in exchange for including affordable units in their development. So for example, maybe they get a little bit more height if they offer to include affordable units. Maybe they get a different lot coverage. Maybe they get a different lot size. You can build a duplex instead of a single family. Some of those types of things. Anything that's kind of a land use or zoning bonus that's not by right, but that is tied to a contractual obligation to provide affordable units as part of receiving that variance. That's what we mean when we say incentives. Linkage and impact fees, those can apply to both either commercial or residential or both. As Phil mentioned, there's a Nexus study already that's about to be underway, I think, with the EPS to recalibrate your existing fee. And then requirements. So this is what we commonly call inclusionary zoning or inclusionary housing or IZ or IHOs. All of that's the same thing. All of that specifically means requirements on new developments that anytime you build something new, even if you're not asking for a zoning change, you have to include some proportion of the units as affordable. Inclusionary zoning typically just applies to residential, not commercial. So a lot of times you'll see sort of a commercial linkage fee paired with a residential inclusionary policy, so that you're kind of capitalizing on both of those types of developments. But on commercial, it's typically a fee-oriented one, whereas in an inclusionary, that's on residential, and it's a delivery of units. So go ahead and jump to the next to kind of further illustrate these. We have these very nicely drawn. This is why I'm not a planner, I'm an economist, because this is my best artwork right here. Those are buildings, obviously. I think it's super clear, right, Elizabeth? You can vouch. But this basically shows you kind of the difference. So in an inclusionary, those orange boxes are meant to represent affordable units. In inclusionary, those are automatically included because you're building, no matter what you're doing. In a linkage fee, you don't have to provide any affordable units, but you do have to pay a fee. And then on an incentive, you only have to provide those units if you're getting that, taking advantage of whatever that might be. Obviously, this is just an example. We're not here to recommend specific incentives as part of that. There are different contexts in which these different options make the most sense or are most effective. On the inclusionary side, those tend to be most effective in high growth areas with pretty strong markets. We'll talk about that a little bit, what that means a little bit in the next slide. Linkage fees are generally most effective when they're either part of another fee system or when that's kind of a common component of the process, and or when development is really driving jobs. So we see a really clear nexus in that when you've got a lot of development that's really increasing your job growth. And then incentives, to be perfectly frank, work best when your zoning code is terrible. So what you want is, for a good incentive, is really bad zoning. So we're not necessarily here to say you should hold your zoning hostage as a way of making affordable an option, but there's always room for some type of incentive as well, right? So I don't want to oversell it by saying, oh my gosh, incentives are gangbusters. They are, but typically they work best when developers want something that they can't do by right? And so that it's often, as you're going through a zoning code process, a lot of times we end up with incentives based on things that couldn't get through. That maybe planning commission or planning staff thought, this is going to be a great idea, and it makes the public a little bit nervous. That's oftentimes when we say, well, maybe that's a good candidate for an incentive, an affordability incentive, something like that. Broadly speaking, the pros of these we call these market-based tools, right? Because they're really dependent on new development, and they're essentially leveraging that new development. The perk for you is that they are very low cost to the city because we're shifting that onto kind of development activity and private sector activity. So that's a big pro. The con is kind of the same. It does shift that burden onto new development, and it does require continued residential growth to deliver those outcomes. So we'll sometimes see, communities that are very low growth or very landlocked with no development potential. Inclusionary is just not going to deliver much, right? So it may not be kind of worth it in that context. That's kind of generally the pros and cons. Let's jump to the next. So as I mentioned, it is a market-driven program. It leverages that new development. It is a keep-up tool as opposed to a catch-up tool. I do think it's important to note when we're talking specifically about inclusionaries, we're saying we're requiring something of developers as part of their, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, but just the context that we have when we're not talking about what we would need to do in the future. And these two are one's current, one's keep up and catch up are current and past. It sounds like if we're trying to catch up, that means we didn't do something. If we're keeping up for present day, we're not talking about the future in this context. So just want to clarify that's what we're talking about.
Right. Like, so when I say catch up, I mean in the context of affordable housing, right? So you have a goal of having 12% of your housing units be affordable. And so a catch up would be like, oh my gosh, we're only at 10%. We've got to catch back up. And that generally means we need more units. We've got to kind of fill that gap to get up to our 12%. Keep up is sort of forward looking, where we say, okay, how can we make sure that going forward, 12% of new development is all affordable? Is there a way that we can kind of keep up with new development on that affordability goal?
Okay.
And so inclusionary, if you put in an inclusionary place and say it's at 12%, then you're taking care of the future, because you're saying automatically 12%, we're going to hit 12% on all future growth. And now we just have to figure out how to kind of get our current stack up to 12%. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. One question that commonly comes up on inclusionary when we have these conversations is, do we have to make it a completely neutral impact on developers? So if we're going to have a requirement for affordable housing units to be included, do we have to give them enough that that offsets the cost to them? Broadly speaking, we see these policies be effective even if it's not a net neutral impact on developers. So I just want to keep that in mind. We do typically look at, okay, what is the magnitude of impact? You know, if we said, okay, going forward, 75% of your units have to be at 30% AMI, probably nobody's going to build anything, right? That would be limiting. And so we do want to make sure, because this is market driven, it's reasonable. It doesn't have to be a net zero impact. So let's jump to the next. As I mentioned, where and when does inclusionary work? This is one of those topics that tends to get heated. Developers don't want it. They don't want to be told to do anything. They don't want parking requirements. They don't want inclusionary. They don't want a lot of things, understandably, because they're trying to get something done. So these often do get heated, but the reality is that there is a lot of really good research on inclusionary and the impacts or lack of impacts that it has on development. And so this is really where we see, from research and from experience, this is where it works best. Communities with strong residential growth, because it only applies to new development. Strong housing prices relative to nearby peers. So if inclusionary does increase the effective cost of development, then developers are going to start really considering, what are my alternatives? We have actually already taken a look at this for Lafayette and feel like you're meeting these criteria already, that the regional market is strong enough that this is not going to compromise your ability to attract development if you move forward with an inclusionary. And then the other thing is it works best when you also have other housing policies and programs in place. As we've talked about, it's not a silver bullet. It doesn't solve all your problems. It is a really, really good tool in a strategic context of other things that you are already doing.
So when we tried this in the past, this is, you see in the early 2000s, right? It wasn't as successful, but now you made the statement that you do feel like the city of Lafayette meets these requirements now that the economy's changed. We're becoming much more of a desirable community to live in, and more businesses and homes have been developed here. So do you feel like it'd be more successful this day and age?
Yeah, so for a couple of reasons. One is, I think my understanding was that there was kind of a perception in the past or in the previous program that to be successful, it has to deliver units. I would say we want to think about how to measure that success. So a program that creates revenue for affordable housing can also be considered successful. So as we get into the nitty-gritty of these policies and how they work, they can really be designed to create the actual unit or to create revenue, because there's almost always a fee in lieu. So you can build the units or you can pay a fee. If the fee is set pretty low relative to the cost of building units, everybody's going to pay the fee. If the fee is set really high relative to the cost of building units, everybody's going to build the units. And so we've talked to a handful of communities with really similar conversation in Steamboat Springs, which is a different community, but very similar experience with the previous inclusionary. And their council was like, this didn't work, but they actually generated millions of dollars of revenue. They just didn't feel like they got the units. And so some of that is really calibrating the system or the policy to get what you want out of it. And that's one of the things we want to talk about tonight is, what do you want to get out of this if you do it? So that's one reason I think is really just adjusting, making sure the program is calibrated to deliver what you want it to. The other thing that is different about the market context right now is that the difference between affordable housing prices, so where we would suggest you set your inclusionary requirement, is much further below market, because your housing prices have gone up. That's true across the Front Range, but certainly true in Boulder County and in Lafayette. So there's a bigger difference right now between market prices and where an inclusionary home would be priced. And that is really what protects the program from default, from foreclosure. It keeps the deed restriction really healthy, essentially. And so some of there were a handful of programs that in the sort of housing crisis or the wake of the recession back in 2010, those prices got too close together. And so when you have a deed restriction, but it's essentially the same as a market price, it becomes a lot less desirable. And so you want a healthy margin between like market price and the deed restricted price, and that's really what keeps the program successful. So I think it's really technical, really fast, but for those reasons and for just the market health in general, we feel that you're in a good position to have this type of program.
Did you just define strong? Because I'm used to seeing numbers. you just?
Yeah, I mean, that is obviously a fairly vague description right now. That
You
is.
just described it. I mean, what you were describing is what that means when you use
Yes,
strong.
yes, exactly. All right, let's jump to the next. So this is just a quick review of other inclusionary programs in the Front Range of Colorado. So Boulder has a program. The percentages that you see kind of on top, that's the percent of units that have to be affordable when a new development comes online. We call that the set aside. So how many units or what percentage of units have to be set aside as affordable? And then the AMI, that's area median income, as you all know, that's kind of the target income range or affordability range that those programs are looking for. So typically we'll see a different AMI target for rental than for sale or ownership. It's really common. So Boulder's is 25% of units at 60 to 80% AMI for rental or 80 to 120 on for sale. Broomfield has a program as well. They have a 20% requirement at 60% AMI for rental. They only require 10%, but they do that at 80% AMI on the for sale side. Denver's is, their program's a little bit more complicated. It's like 8 to 12% depending on where you are in the city, but for most of the city, it's 8% as their set aside, and then 60% AMI on the rental side or 80% on for sale. Longmont has a 12%. They set that, as you might imagine, based on their goal of 12%. So they obviously have committed to the same goal Lafayette has. That's why they set theirs at 12%. They have a fairly, I think they have the lowest AMI requirement on the rental side. So 50% AMI is the rental requirement for income targeting and 80% on for sale. Littleton has the lowest set aside. So they only have a 5% set aside. So they get fewer units. And their program is relatively new, but they set a really high fee in lieu because they want to make sure they were getting units. And so they are getting units out of that. It's a lower set aside, but they're getting really good unit delivery. And that's set at 60% AMI on the rental and 80% AMI. That's just for context. You don't have to follow any of these. You don't have to set that, but that gives you a little bit of context. There's probably 3 or 4 other jurisdictions that are actively considering and evaluating adding an inclusionary program as well. So with that, that's kind of, did you have a question?
Well, I was just wondering why, because one of the questions was, do we want them to be different for rental versus for sale? And these all obviously have chosen for sale to be higher AMI. Is there a reason for that?
Yes, that is partly because on ownership, the market price is much, much higher, and the ability to qualify typically pushes people into a higher income need. So it's going to be really hard to find folks that are going to even meet qualifications, like lending qualifications, if you set it really low. Whereas, I mean, you start to hit market rate rental is really going to start coming in at like 80% AMI and 100% AMI. And so you want to make sure on both of these, you're staying under the market. That's the goal, you know. And so we typically see that. We're also seeing more and more folks saying, we just want to align this with Prop 123. We got to hit that goal anyway, so let's set it with that. That's a lot of times the impetus for setting those as well. So that's kind of my overview of inclusionary. I'm happy to answer more detailed questions. I think what we're hoping to hear from you tonight is just what general questions do you have about it? These are some of the questions that we think are helpful in evaluating if and how you want to move forward with looking at a policy or evaluating more details on a policy of inclusionary. You don't necessarily have to have specific answers to every one of these, but hopefully they're helpful prompts for you all to think about, you know, what outcomes are we really trying to achieve with a policy like this? Is this the right policy to achieve those outcomes? And then how would this fit with other housing and strategies and programs that you're already moving forward? We talked about that a little bit in the context, but it's helpful, I think, to think about it again. And then just what concerns do you have about potential unintended consequences or trade-offs and whether that's worth it? You know, harkening back to kind of the older one, what were some of the challenges with that? How do we make sure we don't do that again? So would love to hear just kind of thoughts, questions, concerns, and ideas for this.
I have it. So Aspen, according to the data, Aspen jumped in like 1977.
Yeah.
And they obviously are limited by the mountains. They can only grow so much. I have friends who live in there. They still live in the affordable housing that they were in before. And I think it was limited at 30 years for Aspen, which is, that's more than 1977. So it sounds like they're still, maybe it still exists. They could renew it if they did. I don't know if they did or not, but, and we didn't do it in 2011. We decided to stop doing it. Now we might do it again. And it sounds like, I'm just not sure what market forces would not work here in the Front Range, but did work in Aspen, very different towns. But would we ever need to remove this? Is there a trigger that would say, like, trying to bounce the IZ, whereas Aspen's held on it for 50 years or whatever?
Great question. Yeah, and I would say lots of our mountain communities, resort communities, commonly lean on an inclusionary policy as one of their strategies to make sure they're developing workforce housing because they have such an extreme market imbalance. So it's really common in our mountain communities. Aspen has one of the oldest ones. They have continued to do that. So the ones that were first built did have that 30-year restriction. So those could be expiring most of the time. I don't know about Aspen, but most of our mountain communities do a really good job of keeping those affordable if they need to. They'll renew that or look for ways to kind of keep those in the affordable inventory. And then anything new that gets built, has another 30-year term on it. In terms of thinking about, hey, is there a ripcord? What do we need to look at if this isn't working? There are some kind of standards that you can look to say, okay, and typically we would suggest measuring this by how close do your affordable prices, the deed restricted prices, get to market. When those start to get close together is when you want to say, oh, what do we need to do here? There is only one program in the country that I know of that actually has paused or modified their program specifically with market conditions, and that was in Santa Fe. Santa Fe has had a really, really long history with inclusionary housing as well. And they, in the recession about 2010 or 11, they said, oh, we need to adjust the set aside. And so they lowered their set aside for about 3 to 5 years, I think, until the market kind of rebounded, and then they kicked it right back to where it was. Okay. So there are ways to build that in. There's a couple of metrics that we can recommend. Here's what you want to track over time. Here's what you want to look at. Here's the economic conditions in which you want to say, do we pause? Do we lower the fee? The other thing that we've seen communities discuss is, should we just lower the fee in lieu in times of economic hardship? And that sort of drives folks to a fee versus paying the unit, but it's an easy thing to adjust regulatorily to say, we're just going to lower the fee for the next 2 years because we understand things are hard, basically.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Other questions or responses to the prompts here, or thoughts, comments, anything? Councilor Sampson.
I think the one thing for Lafayette that we have to think about is the fact that this is one strategy, and each one of your affordable housing strategies plays with each other. And they either play well together or they don't, and they create problems. And I think Lafayette has already some things in place. It's difficult for me to decide whether inclusionary housing makes the most sense before we know what's coming out of this impact fee study, because I think they can compete. And I think you run into the same sort of thing that we in Lafayette are working with Boulder County to do these homes where they are being purchased up and they're being offered for people that are low and moderate income. That actually could be easier in the end. It could be something that, easier is not the right word, it's a better facilitator in some cases. So I would be interested in saying we really need to look at all the strategies together to decide what is the best combination of strategies.
Could I speak to just kind of how those interplay as well? And so we are planning to work with some of the outcomes of that impact fee study. And so typically how we see those programs working in tandem is so the impact fee study determines the fee that you can legally assess as an affordable housing linkage fee. So it says, okay, with new development, here's the fees you're allowed to charge because those are the ones that relate to the actual impact that development is creating. Typically, for communities that have both an inclusionary and an impact fee system, if you are paying the residential impact fee, you don't necessarily build the unit. So it's kind of an either or. So in an inclusionary system, there's also a fee in lieu, right? And so we would substitute those, right? So on the residential side, you would most likely have an inclusionary program that also has a fee option. So if you're building residential, you can say, I'm building these units or I'm paying a fee. that nexus study will also help you understand that fee and what that residential fee could be. The linkage fee also applies to commercial development. And so the way that pairs nicely is that if you have both an impact fee and an inclusionary system, you are capturing the impact on affordable housing from all types of developments as opposed to just residential. So yes, they should work together. You don't want to assess an impact fee for affordable housing and then also require units to be built. Those should be offsetting and coordinating as part of that. As a fee in lieu is essentially how you would work that in. So we wouldn't necessarily recommend those stacking, right? So there would be trade-offs between those two. So like Denver has both, Boulder has both. There's at least one other community that has both an impact fee and an inclusionary. So they're fairly commonly in tandem. And we are going to work, we know EPS really well, who's doing your impact fee study. We're going to work with some of the feasibility that comes out of that as well and talk about how that would relate to an inclusionary system.
Yeah, I just don't think they have had the experience of playing that game.
Yeah, let me just make sure I'm understanding. So an impact fee would be connected to commercial, right? And then what you're saying is an inclusionary zoning requirement with cash in lieu as an option, if they so choose, is on residential, right?
Yeah.
So they just,
So with
Yeah,
an
that's
impact fee,
simple.
you actually have to find a link to commercial. So you have to say, commercial happening in this community is going to increase the number of employees at this income level, and they're at an affordable income level, and therefore, we can charge that, we can link that together and say there is a
needed.
justifiable reason
got it.
to do that. Yeah, so
Got it.
you could do that. I have heard it actually in other, have commercial and residential before on that linkage. But that's really important because there is case law out there on that area. Whereas like state law, correct me if I'm wrong, Molly, state law requires on inclusionary housing that you offer the option to do a fee in lieu. You have to have a separate option. You can't just say, this is it.
Yeah, and there are multiple options as you get into it. So fee in lieu is certainly the most common option for compliance. I mean, building units is like the main requirement. The most common option alternative is a fee in lieu. There's also land donation options or some of those other types of things, or supporting an affordable housing development kind of thing.
Yeah, I think another thing to consider through conversations is when we talk about AMI, a lot of the data and information we have is relative to Boulder County as a whole, whereas
Yeah.
Lafayette, we are sort of an outlier in a sense when it comes to calculating that, and so and we're very socioeconomically diverse within ourselves as a city, and so when we consider 80%, 60%, wherever, it's important to consider that Boulder, city of Boulder's AMI is different from ours, even though we're in the same county.
Yeah.
And I don't want that to.
Well, it's done by HUD, so they actually put you in metropolitan statistical areas. So we don't have a choice over the area that defines
But
the
we-
AMI.
But we do have the choice on where we set our
Percentage.
percentage.
We
It
could
just means you would
lower.
want to set yours at a deeper AMI potentially
We
to
could,
make sure
yeah, I
you're serving
mean-
the people that have the greatest needs. Yeah, and that you're below what your market is
Right.
for new development. But
Right.
yeah, great point.
Okay. Other points, thoughts, questions? Councilor
Just a
Ponce?
point of clarification, so we can determine the AMI that is in our code?
Well, that's what we're going to do through this process, right? Is like when we look at those numbers on the previous slide, right? When we look at the the cost of these units,
percentage.
right, to the do they apply to?
So the calculation is done, this is where I was saying, the calculation is done by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. So they do the calculation of what is the area median income. So they set that for certain areas. So we can't calculate that differently, right? Because it's common knowledge, it's common definitions, right? Is what you're trying to work with. Because you're working with developers who are going to say, what is the AMI, what is the area median income for the area? And they will define that, we're in the Boulder area, okay? But what I believe our mayor is saying in this, just like this, we could say, we are not going to, in our strategies, we are not going above a certain AMI level to offer incentives or to, or inclusionary housing requires this many units that are serving people that are at the 60% area median income, rather than some of these are saying 80%.
Okay.
I mean, this is
Are we
just,
included with the city of Boulder?
no, this is just ultimately what we're gonna have to decide as a council. right?
Calculations? Yes. Yes. So
Well,
the
that kinda
calculation
blows
is
a
the
lot.
area. The calculation is the area. It's like Denver Aurora is one of the metropolitan areas, okay? But it includes a lot of different communities within that area.
I'm sorry, Council Barnes, I'm just a little bit confused on your question.
But that's why Longmont's at 50%, I think, right? Because they recognize in Longmont, they're not the same income as Boulder.
We're not either.
Right.
Right, that's-
And so that's why they put it at 50% of that rather than 60%, which maybe Boulder did, or even 80, right?
Maybe our range.
So if
But please
Boulder's
don't-
skewing your numbers, you just bring it down. 'Cause
Yeah.
that's the simple way to.
Because right now we're at 80%.
And realize your area median income is also dependent on how many people are in your household.
Yeah.
So how many people are working in that household. So
Right.
there's a whole lot that goes into figuring it out. And it sounds, if you just take one part out and just identify that, it can seem like, oh, that's it.
Do we define low income right now at 80% of the AMI?
For city affordable units, that's how they're defined.
And Longmont's at 50?
Just their inclusionary program is at 50. So there's some things that they have to still use a federal definition of low income, which is 80% AMI. So for example, like a LIHTC, because it's federally funded, has to income average at 60% AMI. And you don't get to say, we want to target 50 or we want to target 80
Right.
because it's federal money. But this would be a local program. And so you could say, yeah, we want to target, our biggest need is at 50% AMI. That's where we want to
So
target.
we could choose that.
You can
Okay,
choose that.
That was my question. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, I think for tonight, what we're trying to get is, do you want us to continue to explore IH as part of all the other tools that we're also going forward? So we hate to send Molly down a path where you guys are like, nope, this is off the table, but it sounds like you guys are still interested in continuing to explore that work, and obviously we'll be bringing it back
Yeah.
with the code, with other programs that we're developing.
And bring it back with more detail sort of fleshed out of what we might recommend, given your market conditions and your policy kind of landscape. We would come back and say, hey, here's where we think this would probably fit well. As the Nexus study gets underway, here's how we think this might fit or pair with an impact fee system. So we would come back with a little bit more detail, as long as conceptually you're interested in kind of moving it forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think these ideas we're open to further exploration on them, gathering data, input from others, and then having discussion. But as mentioned tonight, we're not committing to any of us. We're just committing to furthering our research and understanding of them.
Mayor, can I just make one? I just want to highlight something that you said, Councilor Sampson, that I think we're unique in that we have a lot of already affordable units, right? And so how this plays with that, I mean, I look at some of those examples, right? And like you drive through parts of Denver, they're building massive apartments, Boulder too, right? And so like that's not, I think, what we imagine for maybe in certain pockets, right? We've got some right here, and that's good. But we have a lot of naturally affordable, and I think it says it really well in our housing plan, right? So like, I think a question that I would really be interested in hearing more about is, how does this impact that, and how can we successfully use this tool, and how does it connect to other tools, to your point, Nicole, to do that of when we build new apartments, it's affordable, but also supporting our continued growth around keeping those already affordable units affordable.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, they brought up another question. Councilor Freeland. This term of build out, I've been trying to understand exactly where the metrics are for that one. So we're not 2000, it's not 2011. We've got developments that came in. We've got at least three that are, for whatever reason, still coming. If the biggest ones that we have on the books right now come to fruition, where our urban growth boundary is fairly limited. So are we approaching build out at that point then?
I mean, I will punt to planners over here to say, I mean, some of that depends on what your zoning continues to look like. You know, this can also apply to infill. It applies to new units that are being developed, right? So whether that's in greenfield or infill space, it would apply to either way.
Could
But-
that be called redevelopment?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're kind of approaching a new chapter in the city's history, and that this new code will help us address is that the current code is really meant for new development, growing outward, whereas there's a lot of tools in this draft code that allow for the flexibility to redevelop a property that's within a neighborhood already. So whether that be a large commercial redevelopment or something in a neighborhood. And so when that happens, an inclusionary zoning ordinance or fees would certainly take effect.
Thank you.
Okay, well, if there isn't anything else, I think we move to the next steps, please.
Yep, so in August, unless you want to take, we'll be
You've been sitting quietly. Say some things.
we'll be releasing the consolidated draft of the land use code in August. So that's all three modules kind of stitched together so you can see how everything works with each other. We'll be starting that community engagement, and then that'll run through September, and then in the fall, we'll continue the engagement. We'll re-engage our working group, and then figure out a good time to re-engage council. So.
Perfect. Okay, well, thank you so much for taking the time to join us this evening. We really appreciate all
Thanks
the
for
hard
your
work.
feedback and guidance. That helps us get going with our next few steps.
Yes, thank you so
Thank
much.
you, thank you.
Yeah, we look forward to future conversations.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
We look forward to seeing everyone at a public engagement activity. Please feel free to join us. Phil and I are quite focused on the food and snacks that we'll need to have there.
All right.
Important priorities.
I'm the food person.
Yeah.
You had me at snacks.
Snacks.
Should we move on to this one, Mayor?
Yeah, I was just giving folks a second here. Thank you. Yeah, so next up on our agenda is our next item, which is the allocation of the 2025 private activity bonds. And we have our planning department here to get us started. Thank you.
Yep. So the purpose of this item is to review two requests for the city's 2025 private activity bond allocations, or PABs. So what we'd like to do is to provide a brief presentation for council. We'd like to talk about background, how we got here, what exactly these PABs are, the two proposals that we received, and then really just hand it over for council for your discussion and feedback prior to us bringing a full single proposal to you next month. So in terms of background, we received what we think are two pretty strong proposals for the city's 2025 PAB allocation. This is the first time we've received two proposals, so we've typically only have gotten interest from one party. I think that's also starting to happen regionally, where these things are just getting more competitive. And so tonight is really just a quick discussion on the two proposals, not a decision, but really just a discussion so we can bring forward one of these projects for your formal consideration at your second August meeting. Yep. So just taking a moment to describe what exactly private activity bonds are. So these are specialized financing tool to help projects like affordable housing become more financially feasible through tax-exempt bonds. So they're allowed through the IRS, and in this case, municipalities and some housing authorities issue bonds, but don't have the obligation to repay the investors. It essentially provides bonding authority to a project at a lower interest rate, and so it's full. It must be repaid. It's not cash, and so the way it works in terms of the allocation is that the IRS sets a threshold of $125 per person, and so each year the state of Colorado has a population estimate, and that amount of bonding authority is issued to the state. And then the state divides that in half and says half of that bonding authority goes to statewide entities like the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority, and then the other half goes to cities. Typically, larger cities over 16,000 will actually get a direct allocation, so that's what we receive. And then the rest of that share goes to a statewide allocation for others, like smaller towns, to apply for. In Lafayette, our 2025 share of this private activity bond is at 1.99 million. And so we have a few options when this happens. So you typically see these come up on a council agenda around this time of year, typically around August. And so to avoid losing the allocation, we'll need to commit it to a specific project, such as the two ones that we're highlighting this evening, or assign it to CHAFA for use as in affordable housing in general. That action would need to take place by September 15th, and so that's why we have it scheduled for August. Otherwise, it would just be reverted to the statewide pot of funds. So our goal here is to commit it to a Lafayette project so that bonding authority and that benefit stays locally. Previous allocations, we've allocated our portion to Willoughby Corner for the last 4 years. We then assigned it generally to CHAFA for affordable housing in general. And then in 2019, we assigned ours to CHAFA again, but this time specifically for a project, Traditions at Sola here in Lafayette. The two requests that we received a request from the Boulder County Housing Authority for the phases 2 and 3 of Willoughby Corner, new construction of both rental and for sale units, and related a private firm for Helios Station, and we'll kind of dive into where that project is in just a minute, for the acquisition, rehabilitation, and preservation of 30 existing townhomes. The Willoughby Corner project, as council's well aware, they're starting to plan for phase 2, which includes 128 rental units, and phase 3, which includes 80 for sale units. So this would be one of the funding mechanisms, one of the many that would go into making those phases come to fruition. They're also planning for some supportive housing and infrastructure investments as well, with construction anticipated to start in 2027. The second application that we received is Helios Station. This is along North 111th Street, just north of City Park and east of the police station. And we just wanted to show the vicinity map just to orient council to the location. To take a note on the actual firm, so Related is a pretty well-established private firm. They've do a lot of things, but affordable housing is one of them. They've purchased over 110 affordable housing properties with a portfolio of about 16,000. This would be their first project in Lafayette. And they are proposing to acquire those townhomes, those 30 townhomes, rehabilitate them, a lot of internal upgrades and site work, and then reestablish a new affordable housing deed restriction on the property that would restrict 100% of those townhomes to an AMI of 60% through 2056. And so right now it has affordable restrictions that aren't permanent, and so those would eventually lapse. If they get this funding, they would also apply for some state CHAFA funding and begin that process in early 2026. Just to kind of highlight a few of the differences, we feel that both of these plans proposals are in alignment with our city goals, including our housing plan. The number of units differs, number of new units in particular. The AMIs are pretty similar, and the timing is fairly similar as well. So I think in this case, in terms of our city plans, we have goals around unit production. We also have goals around preserving our existing affordable units and investing in particularly aging properties. And so what we would do is that staff would prefer to bring one proposal to council on August 19th. The allocation would need to be adopted by mid-September, and so we're wanting to highlight this for you tonight. We've never brought these in advance of these meetings. They're typically on your consent agenda because we only have one person who's interested. In this case, this is our first time, so we wanted to bring it up to council and to see if you had any feedback that would help us in that process. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a couple proposals in front of us today. And it looks like, all of the allocations to go towards one project. And so let's open it up with questions first. Questions from council. Council Freeland.
What's the current Helios deed restriction? Is it 60% as well currently?
I think it actually goes a little deeper. There's two different restrictions on the property, and I think one goes down to as low as 50% of AMI.
Thank you.
And I might also preface, it's been a late night. Phil is facilitating the conversation, but might not know the answers to all of the questions. So we also have that opportunity for your August 5th meeting if you feel like you need substantially more information to make the decision tonight. So again, we'll do our best to answer the questions on behalf of the project applicants, but there might be some.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah, there might be some, but that was a good answer.
Another question.
Keep going.
I'm curious about timing for Willoughby. If we were not to give them the money for this, or help them get this, there would still be time next year potentially too, if they were to come back and say, hey, we want to try this again.
Yes, we could do it each year as long as council opted to do that.
Right.
Yep.
In fact, in the second phase, they had kept getting PAB, and then, so you use PAB, you've got a 3-year period to use it.
Got it.
And there was something that they weren't ready to move forward, so they basically, our PAB got defaulted back.
Oh,
to
that's
us.
why in 2020 or something we went back to
Yeah.
the state. Got it.
So if you go too early on it, it can expire.
Right.
Okay. Other questions? Or comments, thoughts? Can you talk a little bit more about the history, the background of the Helios complex? Because I know for years it had been, I don't know if it was necessarily affordable housing, but there was a government Section 8 support or something like that in the past. Like I know from just growing up.
Yeah, I think
in
it was constructed in 1982, and I think it's been affordable housing since pretty much the construction. Yeah, so it's been to qualifying families, and it's unique because it's they're larger units than oftentimes what we see. So I think they're 2-3 bedroom units, which can really support a family, and so.
And are the units primarily for rent?
I believe so. Yeah, yeah.
And they're all townhomes.
Yes. Townhome kind of configurations. They're, I think technically you could call them apartments, but yeah.
Okay.
I think this is, I just have a bias here because I've been near those apartments, and where they're positioned, I feel like I was really happy to see that Related, which I'm not a great fan of that name, but Related, it took me a while to figure out that's the name of the group, but they are what I would hope we would have for a residential area like this that was built in 1982. And I looked through with what they were going to do, and I was like, this is exactly what I would like to see happen to that. And that is a community. That's a part of our community. They're right on 111th, so the jump comes up and down. And 111th is one of the focus areas for transportation. And I watched kids get on the school bus there. I've also watched our officers put up the radar camera to remind people you need to slow down in that area. And that community is situated, below these large market rate homes and right next to the rec center, right next to the Rothman Trail system. So they're close to the Rothman Trail? The trail system there. The fire station's close by. They're central. And I was really crossing my fingers they would get some love to bring those buildings up to code or up to modern standards. And I know SRAP hasn't had a chance to look at what's going to be put in there. And I imagine our building code would apply.
Yep.
So that would be great to have a community not be displaced. And I think in the packet, it says that there are people who are already applying or thinking, or they're on the list of, they want to apply to be there. So I just think it's great. I wish this is something that, fingers crossed, that we would be able to update that without displacing all the people who live there, because I feel like it's a central part of our community and is serving the function of what low cost housing is, or affordable housing is about. So.
I think just going off that general question, I think definitely for the benefit of the public is just, can you, and I know you already touched on it a little bit earlier, but can you just briefly describe the consequences of not allocating these funds towards each project? Just a quick overview.
Yeah, so allocating the funds to Willoughby or not allocating the funds to Willoughby Corner would certainly add challenges. The amount of funding sources that goes into what they're doing is significant and complex, and there's some federal things happening that may not make that easier. And so we're unsure and not necessarily, we don't think it would derail the project. On the related project, that project won't go forward if we don't approve the private activity bonds. They'll use a combination of our private activity bonds and some state bonding to make that project happen, is my understanding. But certainly impacts on the Willoughby Corner project and significant on the related. So.
But what I heard from them last week was they were going to do a combination 9% and 4% low-income housing tax credit. So once you get 9%, you usually go with that first. So these private activity bonds combine with the 4%. So once somebody is a developer, a project is assigned private activity bonds by a community, then they can go to CHAFA. They go for the 4%, which is a non-competitive low-income housing tax credit, and they say, guess what we got? And then they assign it. And then they go, which is why the preservation of affordable housing project, that says we could start rolling in January. It's because you've got it, as you pointed out, with the other. Willoughby's going to go for the 9%, and then and as well as the 4, and then they'll try to bring the 4 in with the 9, along with every other funding source they're going to need to bring in on that. And I was disappointed that they didn't have their sources and uses chart in here. Because that really does, they're asking for this, but it's in a vacuum. And, other than what they said last week. And there's no housing project that's going to work just on private activity bonds and low-income housing tax credits alone. That's as big as Willoughby Corners Phase 2.
Okay, so it looks like, council, we have a tough decision to make here. I definitely want to hear your thoughts on which direction to go. And that way, hopefully, we can reach a consensus and give staff the direction they need.
I'll just start by echoing everything that you said. I really appreciated your comments, and so I won't repeat them, but thank you for saying them so I don't have to. I think the other thing, too, here is, for me, this is, from what I understand, a new developer in our market, at least in the city, doing this, and I think it's, they may not be back to ask again. And BCHA, it's a great project, obviously, and we've supported them a lot, and I'm sure we will support them in the future as well. They're not going to go away, right? And so, to me, that's an important piece of this too, of just thinking about the kind of the welcoming nature that this sends. Of we appreciate that they are doing this project. We want to support them. We want to make it affordable, and so. I like that part of it. So I'm supportive of assigning to related this cycle.
Thank you.
I also support giving it to preservation, specifically because of that. Private activity bonds are great for preservation projects. And just as we just heard from Molly, one of the things we don't want to be doing is we don't want to be building new and not taking care of what we have. You have to keep your existing up in order to keep your affordable. We're going to hit our 12% here. But the question is, you're going to drop that if you let others go. So you always have to keep that balance. And I really believe strongly in preserving existing existing and healthy affordable housing. And in this case, I've, in my own personal experience, I've seen a lot of these types of projects make a huge difference,
Right.
both in the community and for the people that live there.
And I think the diversity of housing, diversity of affordable housing is extremely important as
Yep.
well. Having multiple projects located throughout the city
Yep.
that folks can use is important. Does anyone feel any differently?
I did. I'm outvoted at this point, so
Okay.
it's fine. But yeah, I
Yeah,
just,
what are your thoughts?
Willoughby Corners to me is really important. We've invested in them so far for particular reasons because it's I mean, we brag about it all the time, right? It's the biggest affordable housing project that's kind in the state of Colorado. There's a reason we love it so much and the reason we put so much into it. I think we should continue down that road. I understand the preservation. I wish we could do both, really. I wish, but for me, I would go with Willoughby. But again, it sounds like I'm kind of outvoted at this point.
Yeah, it's a tough decision. It's not
Yeah.
easy,
Yeah.
Definitely, both projects are extremely valuable. So just evaluating, the pros and cons, and, hopefully, next year, we'll just have the one, or, I mean, maybe, hopefully not. Actually, we don't know, right? But, there's definitely opportunities, next year as well to support that project. Okay, so it sounds like, we have consensus to move forward with allocating those funds towards the, Helios site. Okay. For now. Okay.
Thank you for your time.
Of course, thank you to the department for sticking with us through those items. Really appreciate it.
Okay, let's just get some new name tags here. I think you guys could figure it out, but we might as well just.
Okay.
That's right.
All right, we have one final item for tonight. This is the Rocky Mountain Metropolitan Airport noise impacts discussion. We have our deputy city manager and deputy city attorney here to get us started with this conversation.
Great. I do not know why. Let's see. Two versions in here, so let me just make sure I've got the right one up here. Okay. Okay. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. This evening, we're going to talk about Rocky Mountain Metropolitan Airport, which we'll refer to as RMMA, noise impacts, and some options that we have looked into around engagement related to noise impacts. Tonight, Deputy City Attorney Erin Poe is here with us, and we've been working together on kind of exploring what some of the potential options are. So we are going to share a little bit of background with you on RMMA and talk about some of the current issues going on right now and opportunities, and then we'll discuss some engagement options, and then we'll have some time for questions and discussion. So a little bit of background on RMMA. RMMA is a designated by the FAA as a general aviation airport, also referred to often as a reliever airport. And it supports a range of operations, including corporate business activity, recreational flying, flight training, aircraft charters, and wildland firefighting. It was founded in 1960, and the average annual operations are approximately 280,000 flights, really somewhere between 2,500 flights and 300,000 flights, kind of hovering in that area for about the past, I would say, 8 to 10 years. Early, if you look at the patterns, early in between kind of the 60s and 70s, it was up and then it kind of dipped down a little bit, and then over the last 10 years has progressively gone up. So the traffic has gone up, kind of significantly. It has grown over the past 10 years. It does operate as an enterprise fund for Jefferson County, and so it generates a lot of revenue for Jefferson County. And it also does receive funding as an FAA airport, federal funding from the FAA. So just around kind of the space and the geographic nature of the airport, if you're not familiar where it is kind of just off US 36 in Jefferson County, directly kind of nestled next to Broomfield. You can see the runways there are in the yellow. There are 3 runways, although they are in the process of looking at closing down the runway that is kind of the northeastern runway, the shorter runway. I don't know what the timeline is for that, but there are the 2 runways that run sort of kind of northwestish and to the south. And then there's also in the orange area, those are the traffic patterns, which are kind of the landing and takeoff areas. And the larger dashed line that you see around it is the airspace. And so the airspace is really the area where the air traffic control has control over for the takeoffs and landings. And you can see that Lafayette is, the southern part of Lafayette off 287 is within that airspace. And just kind of at the northern part there of the airspace. That's also where they have kind of regulatory, the air traffic control has kind of regulatory authority of where the planes are when they reach where they have to reach a certain altitude, essentially when they leave that airspace. There is some interplay with DIA airspace, with Denver International Airspace as well. There's a little bit of information about that in the packet, but of course I'm just sharing the very little bit that that I have to share in terms of my very limited expertise. There are a lot of ongoing issues associated with RMMA, and there are also some kind of new and current issues that I want to talk about. So noise issues at RMMA are centered primarily around the flight school and flight training traffic. And a lot of this is related to touch and go traffic, which is where the planes are kind of taking off and landing really quickly so that they can practice that type of activity. There are a lot of flights going between small airports, so people can get in their flight time and do those takeoffs and landings between small airports like Longmont's Vance Brand Municipal Airport. There was a community noise roundtable, which you all are familiar with. Lafayette was involved in that roundtable, and that has dissolved about a year and a half ago. And there are some current impacts that we've heard about. We don't have all the details about, but some potential route changes, temporary, potentially longer term, that have been occurring. And then we know that RMMA is in the midst of some planning efforts, one of them being a Part 150 study, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So with regard to the flight school operations and the small aircrafts, more than 50% of the operations at RMMA are associated with flight training. And one of the biggest issues with the flight training operations are that those aircraft are the smaller aircraft. They're primarily those piston engine aircraft that require leaded fuel. And so they're louder and smaller, and they fly lower. And they also have flight training paths that they like to utilize so they can get in sort of the miles and, again, the kind of traffic patterns where they can go up and down. And they include routes that go north from RMMA to Vance Brand in Longmont. Also, some of those flight training paths go to Boulder Municipal Airport. And then they do have voluntary noise abatement procedures in place. RMMA does not have the authority to control the flight operations in terms of the number of flights that take off, the touch and goes, the ability to limit that, the ability to limit hours. They have no ability to control who comes in and who comes out of the airport. That airspace is obviously regulated by the FAA. And so any noise abatement procedures or recommendations that they have are voluntary. They do have those procedures that, they recommend to the flight schools. And those include things like taking off and getting up to a higher altitude more quickly so that you reduce the impacts of noise. They include kind of reducing the revving of the engine at lower altitudes, and also do include flying over open spaces and over larger highway areas. So those are some of the, and also quiet skies, which is limiting the amount of night flying and early morning flying that you do. So the Part 150 study is a FAA-funded study. RMMA is currently in this process. They're in phase 1, and I think it'll be about a 2.5 year study that will allow the airport to develop and implement noise compatibility plans. Again, this will assess the noise concerns from the airport operations, and it will first develop a noise exposure map. And this is a map that identifies the areas around the airport that has significant aircraft noise exposure, and it creates noise contours that will then help identify or establish noise compatibility program. The noise contours are developed basically on the direct kind of level of noise exposure in the areas closest to the airport. And the decibel levels that they use are 65 to 70. They do have a weighting that they use for kind of nighttime flights, and so that skews things a little bit, but I did share in the packet the noise from the Superior, does basically monthly noise monitoring. And you can see that theirs doesn't appear to be far from this, either above or far below. And so I don't feel that Lafayette is likely to fall within this noise exposure level at any time of day or under any circumstances. And so I think it's unlikely that we will fall within the noise exposure map. And looking at the other Part 150 studies that are at other similar airports like Centennial, that footprint of the noise exposure map is very adjacent to the airport area. So this isn't something that's likely to identify and include Lafayette in any noise abatement procedures. So that's just something to keep in mind in terms of engagement around that. There could potentially be, some other opportunities to engage. We also know that the noise compatibility program, which may provide noise abatement procedures and kind of compatible land use planning recommendations. There isn't a lot of money associated. FAA doesn't have a lot of money to sort of fund that. And the type of noise abatement procedures that are typically provided through that are things like insulation for residential areas that are directly adjacent to those areas impacted by the noise, windows that would be better insulated. That hasn't been a very funded program, a very heavily funded program, and we wouldn't probably qualify. So we're unsure if there would be something from the Part 150 study that would really, impact our community and the impacts that we've seen. Do you have anything to add based on our conversations? Yeah, okay. We did, however, identify some opportunities for engagement, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about kind of the conversations that we had. So we met with RMMA and Jefferson County staff. So there's a new airport director at RMMA as of maybe a year or so ago. And there's also a couple new staff. They do have some outreach staff now. So we met with them as well as the Jefferson County manager. Katie joined us and had a good conversation, just sort of started to establish a relationship there and kind of learn more about what their goals are. Obviously, I think as Councilmember Sampson said in an update from attending one of the events with the Part 150 study, that is voluntary, and they did initiate participation in that. So I think they have an interest and have kind of gone down that road voluntarily, and so I think they're they have been willing and interested in engaging and having conversations with us. So that was positive. We had a positive conversation with them, and we have another meeting scheduled with them as well, that Councilmember Friedland's going to meet with us in that, and also with Jefferson County Commissioner. So we have also had conversations with some community members and advocates around this issue, and so we've heard a lot from the community as well. I know you all have received emails about where people are experiencing these noise impacts. Primarily seems to be on the west side of the 287 corridor is where we're hearing, I think, from most residents based on where they're reporting. Neighboring jurisdictions, so we have talked to directly to Louisville. We have not talked to all of the communities that were initially in the Community Noise Roundtable. Have had conversations with Centennial Roundtable members to hear a little bit more about how they have managed some of these noise issues. And then we've also had conversations with some various aviation consultants. So we're going to talk a little bit about what some of the kind of ideas and options that have come forward. So the first thing that has kind of been clear through a lot of these discussions is that increasing partnerships with communities impacted by RMMA noise is probably one of the most positive things that we can do to sort of just build those alliances and build just sort of the strength in our voices to have those conversations, ongoing conversations with the airport and with Jefferson County, and to work together on kind of strategic opportunities to address the noise impacts. FAA, they developed the Community Noise Roundtable model because they are really not willing to work with a single community in recognizing that moving the noise from one community to the next doesn't really create any benefit to them or to anyone. And so if they have to agree to any changes, they need all communities to be on board. So that's kind of critical in making any, kind of lasting changes, I think. So that's something that would be, I think, just fundamental, is moving that forward. And then further engagement with RMMA and Jefferson County leadership. They are, as an airport that takes FAA funding. They are also, they are under FAA's guidance and direction as well, and so they don't have a lot of decision making in some areas, and so they're somewhat beholden as well. And so, I think continuing to work with them and try to find solutions that might reduce the impacts on the community is going to be essential as well. And then looking at external consulting services is another option. So in terms of partnerships, Louisville as a neighboring jurisdiction has done a significant amount of work in this area. Potentially outreach to some of their council members. Some of you may have already had discussions with them, but I think that could be a place where we could have some conversations and talk about collaborative efforts around advocacy and engagement. I think some of the other jurisdictions that have been impacted, like Westminster, Boulder County and Superior, have been in, a lawsuit with RMMA, and so that probably limits the collaboration at this point. We don't know, that's an appeal. They've appealed that, so we don't know where that's going to go, but that might limit the opportunities there. But there, I think, are other opportunities maybe with Broomfield too, to see what partnerships we can reach there. And the resource needs around that would really be minimal fiscal impact, and it would just require, council and staff time. So we can discuss what that looks like. And then Jefferson County engagement with RMMA, so continuing to meet with them. A couple opportunities have come up. RMMA has offered any council members to participate in tours of operations, and where you can go and kind of see the airport operations, see what they look like, see what kind of planning activities they're undergoing at this time, kind of see what the whole operation looks like so you can understand it better. They also have a seat open on their advisory board. City Manager Doling sent that today. I can't be sure, but I don't know that there's been a northern community in that seat before. In the time that I've worked on this, it's always been a southern community, so it could be beneficial if it would be possible to get an impacted community that's in the airspace that's in the northern, one of the northern communities. So that seems like an opportunity to talk with our neighbors and think about as well. And then requesting ongoing meetings to kind of discuss the operations and impacts at RMMA, especially as things emerge that we think there might be changes in operations or there might be, things going on that we're starting to hear different feedback from the community. So again, this would be minimal fiscal impact in council and staff time. Whoops, this one's the most important one. So we have talked about potential consultants, and we've talked to several consultants in this area, in the subject matter area for consideration. So we met with some consultants who do the type of work that's sort of lobbying and advocacy. So that is one avenue, is to work with whether it's a DC-based or a Colorado-based kind of firm that does advocacy around this. Again, primarily that would be focused at the federal level because of the FAA. FAA is, I think, kind of a notoriously difficult federal agency to sort of penetrate in terms of advocacy. But there are some agencies. We talked to one firm who's been working with Centennial, and they have good relationships, and they can help sort of understand and navigate that, kind of agency and how to potentially work with them. The work that they have done with Centennial has been in partnership with multiple organizations where, again, I think they feel like there's the most, strength is having multiple agencies, because then they can talk to the FAA as a coalition, which is what they're probably most interested in versus just one community. So I think that's something that could be a good opportunity maybe down the road if we can get grouped together. And then we talked to some legal consultants who do aviation kind of legal work, and kind of the primary, the preliminary reaction response that we got from them is that there's not really a successful path forward in terms of legal action for us around what we're experiencing with noise impacts. And so I think if we wanted to go down that road, there's maybe a range of things. We talked to a couple folks who could do things like come and give a presentation to council, or, share more information about just sort of the landscape, the kind of just the limitations, just sort of the expectations for what is really feasible, what those opportunities might be, to doing sort of an extensive sort of memo or sharing for you more information. And then if you wanted to have someone to help provide more in-depth, response or research, we could look at that as well. Yeah, do you want to share anything?
The last attorney that we talked to was very direct and said that, for your dollar, it's unlikely to bear fruit in a legal situation or with litigation, and you would get more bang for your buck in like having a consultant to help advise the airport, like to look at flight plans or incentives. But the money would likely not be well spent trying to bring a lawsuit.
So that was sort of the fiscal impact we looked at. We did get, we got one quote, and we talked to a couple other people that we can get more of that information from you, and I think it just depends on the scope of how much work we wanted someone to do for us. Yeah. So, in terms of discussion and questions, we're happy to take any questions. And then we just are seeking kind of your direction if you're interested in engaging in additional efforts. And in what ways would you like to engage, and how would you like us to proceed?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for that presentation and for doing all that background work on this. We'll start with questions for council. Councilor Freeland.
Well, first of all, thank you. I know it's been a while. And it's one of those problems that's very challenging to deal with, and you can't really win, right? Like you try to do stuff or you try to think through it, and either way, it feels like you can't get anywhere. So I just appreciate your energy on it. Do you mind sharing with the group a little bit about like the past month with some changes in flight paths? I know there's a lot that we don't know, but can you maybe give us a little bit of a download of what we do know?
I can share what we've heard, the information we've gotten from community members, really, and then also that's been we've heard from other councils because they've talked about it in their council meetings, Superior trustees. But so we received information from a constituent that included, maps, reports from a website source that's a blog essentially, and I'm not familiar with the data source. It's a data source that I think is open source data that shows flight tracking from data that compared basically kind of month to month daily activities from flight tracking, one day, and it showed the traffic over Lafayette and Louisville basically going north, and it showed the way the traffic patterns were concentrated, and it appeared, you could tell by appearance, it looked like the traffic patterns were more heavily concentrated over the 287 corridor, and then over certain parts of coming out of Superior and Louisville. And then there was some data that had numbers. Again, I don't know, there wasn't any citation around where the data came from and how it was calculated. So I can't verify where it came from. So we didn't include any of that in the presentation because we just, weren't able to really validate where it came from. But so that is the conversation that we've heard. And then the Superior trustees, one of the trustees brought up that there was there's been a flight, they've been testing a flight change out of the air traffic control at RMMA. Unknown to us why that has occurred. And so these are all questions that we, want to talk to RMMA about when we meet with them, and just ask them, where that, kind of where that has come from, if that's actually has been a directive, if they know where it's come from, if that's, if that is in fact a change that has occurred, if it's temporary, if it's permanent. But that's information that is all sort of secondhand that's come to us. Yeah, through community sources.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And so the reason I ask is, to me, this feels like a really good example of, we had, right, we don't know who to call it air traffic control because I don't know if there is anybody to call, or FAA. To me,
they don't answer.
They don't answer. Yeah, right. I'm not faulting you at all.
Yeah.
Believe me. To me, it seems like a place where having an expert on our team that we can call and say, hey, can you help us find somebody to talk to and just like understand whatever these routes are, would be really, really valuable. And so, for the rest of the council, I feel like, looking at the options, right, like further engagement with our neighboring jurisdictions, I don't know how you're all going to feel about that, but seems like something we might be supportive of. Further engagement with RMA, Jeffco, again, I don't know where you're going to land, but seems like something. That third one, I think, is maybe where there's not as much consensus. And to me, this is a great example of that's why we have that, is because we're not necessarily going to ask them to be doing work all the time, but if something comes up that we just need somebody who really understands like how the FAA and air traffic control and the airports all connect. And stop me if we have that already on our team. I know both of you have been working really hard on that, but to me, it feels like a resource that would be valuable for us to have. There's some other examples too that I can give that I think would be really valuable to have that, but I just wanted to thank you for sharing that, kind of what's been going on the last month, because to me, it really highlights like when something like that happens, I think it's hard for us to know what can we do and who do we tell and how do we, so I think having that's valuable. So I'll pause right there.
Thank you. Yeah, other questions? Question for now, Councilor Barnes?
I have a couple of questions. I've heard about this north-south runway and the closing of it potentially for over a year. Did they state any other reasons why it's not clear if they're closing it?
They talked about it when we met with them, that they were closing it, and I don't really know. I don't really understand the reasons. I think it was the utilization, that it's only used in certain weather circumstances. So I don't, I'm not sure if it's, what the reasons really are in terms of their numbers. Yeah. I mean, I remember it was in the PowerPoint they provided to us, which I think I shared to you, but I'm not sure, about what the impacts or implications would be.
The meeting that I was at, they weren't very clear about
The reasons for it.
or when they were going to do it or
Yeah.
why or how. But it's interesting that it's still open. And I'm wondering, since this isn't your first experience with the noise issues, if you would share some of the differences you notice now versus previously?
In terms of impacts? Or in terms of?
Anything?
Yeah. I don't think much has changed. I think, I would have to go back and look at the exact number, but I think that the city of Louisville spent about $50,000 on the initial research study that was done, and that was with 2 aviation consultants. And they were pretty clear from the beginning, because they were aviation consultants, that they weren't going to be able to change anything, but it was to provide a lot of information for potential voluntary recommendations. And those actually were the recommendations that then became the recommendations that RMMA made as their voluntary recommendations. And I think there was decent follow-up initially in terms of trying to educate the flight schools. And then I don't know that there's been more follow-through with, bringing the flyers around, and, they put signs up, and I don't know if the signs are still. So I think at that time there was, there could be opportunities there. But the traffic has increased, which I think it's likely to continue to increase, and so I think that I don't know that things have changed significantly. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think the primary issue is that the piston engines are hard on people's well-being. And I know there are people who've moved out of Niwot because of the skydiving company up there. And the kids just can't handle that sound over and over and over again. And looking at the data, their noise study, that's by far the biggest noise issue, because that's, like you said, over 50% of the flights are those aircraft. And I understand the inability to get clear information from the FAA. There's more than what was on this slide deck there's flights flying in there that we don't know about and won't get to find out about, because it's a multi-purpose airport. So I understand the lack of clarity behind exactly what's happening and why they're choosing what they're choosing, but that coming off of the westbound runway and making that turn over Superior, talked to people who said this is really challenging. So I think that the people in Superior might be experiencing more of a challenge with that than the surrounding communities with that. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think the direct impacts there, I think, are really, they're significant in terms of the noise and, yeah.
And I saw in the packet there was some potential for them to start using the unleaded fuels.
That is supposed to be installed anytime this summer. They said this summer. I think in the last packet I read, it's sometime in the next few months. So they'll be offering it. They'll be offering, unleaded fuel. They can't force a fuel switch, so they have to offer both types of fuel. But that's definitely a strategy that hopefully will help.
And last question. So if we were to, and I think it's, from what I can see, the only thing what would be prudent as our council is to communicate with not just the Boulder County municipalities, but also the Broomfield municipalities. Even though their enterprise is benefiting their county, you still should talk to them. And I don't know if there's a way to help mitigate the noise problem with people in both counties, but it seems like there's nowhere to put they can't go any higher. There's nowhere for them to go, really, and they're flying these planes that are noisy. Is there any thought in and I really appreciate, like, Councilor Freeland and everyone here, I really appreciate your digging into this, because there's a lot. Is there a space for us to provide some kind of mitigation for people who are struggling with this sound? Is that something that we could do for all the municipalities? Because we're not going to get rid of the planes, but.
A noise mitigation program usually is funded through court funds. Just the ones, usually noise mitigation programs are funded through court funds, sometimes grant funds.
The one legal consultant that we talked to had mentioned the program that the FAA has to mitigate noise by funding like better windows. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like the money's dropped off significantly for those kind of programs. So, she suggested that maybe something like that's an option where, communities fund something like that, or other kind of like technical expertise about, well, this is how you can route or change your flight plans or take off to provide relief. And more along the technical expert consultant idea.
Thank you. And I did have one more question. Sorry, it just fell out of the stack. In the packet, it says that there was a Part 1000, Part 150 study done in the past, and this one's an update, or is this what's the difference between the two, I guess?
Well, so Centennial had done a Part 150 study, and they're doing one right now also, and theirs is an update.
But this is the first time for Part 150 for RMMA.
Yeah, this is the first one for RMMA.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And they really don't have control over what the flight schools are flying? RMMA can't tell the flight schools where the students are flying?
I mean, the air traffic control can sort of direct them kind of, which ways to go, but.
And that's FAA?
Yeah, that's it.
Because it's all interconnected with all the other
Yeah.
airports and DIA, everybody.
Yeah.
Like as a national system, was
Yeah.
kind of focus. It's one part of a national system.
Yeah.
So I go back to that because I'm not sure how a consultant could say you should take different flights if it's not really under their control.
Yeah, there's lots of data and images. I think it was in the Louisville study. If you haven't had a chance to look at that, there's one chart that shows sort of it almost looks like more than half a pie, 2/3 or maybe a third of a pie or something. I can't remember. But anyway, it shows where planes could feasibly go based on geography, based on Denver airspace, and so they have those constraints, and then they have to go within where other planes are going, and so they sort of have to direct traffic within all of those different constraints. So that's, they kind of are directing them in sort of a general direction that's within those constraints.
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm saying, is that
Yeah.
we can't prescribe, it's up to the controllers
Yes,
to tell them
yes.
where to go, and
We
we can
can't
suggest
prescribe
things,
that.
but it's where they,
Yeah.
yeah,
We
okay.
cannot prescribe where they go.
Councilor Tapia Vega, did you have some?
That was primarily my question. I think sound is taking kind of the main stage because that's what kind of hits us all. But there are a few other issues here for me. Pollution is a big one. That's going back to like these training, these flight training is the one that primarily is like the leaded fuel and obviously the low flying aircraft, which I think is a huge issue. But you're saying that all kind of falls on air traffic control and FAA. That's not something that we could really regulate, even if we were be able to tell the airport what to do, which we obviously can't, right?
Right. I mean, and with the pollution, at the state level, the state has some funding for essentially to support the fuel switching, and I think it's through CDPHE. And that is helping to fund some of these airports it's basically for air quality purposes. And so there are those types of programs that are more focused on the air quality piece. That's one sort of regulatory aspect that's statewide around but other than noise, other than that, it's around the noise, there's not much really that we can do because FAA regulates that airspace. Yeah.
And that was brought up in the Boulder County lawsuit too. They not only sued on noise, but also pollution. So we'll see what happens with their appeal. That is one of the concerns that they raised and we're pursuing too.
I think a good way to think about it, right? So RMMA can control what's on the ground, FAA's on the sky, and so they can kind of decide what their business model looks like as far as how many schools, how many different types of business. And I know when we talked with them, they are interested in trying to see about shifting their schools to maybe another airport that's more in a rural area, but it is, as Megan mentioned, an enterprise fund, so it does have to self-support itself too. So like they're really in charge of like what the business model is, and then anything above that, what the FAA controls. So that's where it gets hard to. You like to think that RMA could control that, but that's how I think of that delineation: is the ground is theirs, the airspace is the FAA.
Amazing, thank you. One other question. It feels like every time we talk about the FAA, we're kind of pushed away from reaching out to them directly as a city. What's the reason for that? Why shouldn't we, as just a single municipality, go to the FAA and say this is happening? What can you do?
I mean, I think we can reach out to the FAA, and I think we can try to set up meetings with them, especially, I know the Mayors and Commissioners Coalition, when I think it was probably 3 or 4 years ago when the MCC went for transportation meetings, several communities also met with the FAA during that time to talk specifically about RMMA. So, those kinds of meetings have happened around this issue. So they would talk to one municipality. I think, it's for them, when they're talking about something like noise impacts, hearing from one community is really just hearing that we don't like the noise, we want it to go somewhere else. And, so they would rather hear from all the communities to say, here's, what can we do to sort of mitigate the impacts to all of our communities and try to come up with some type of collective solution.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we do need to, unless there are any other questions, we do need to come to a decision here on next steps. So it looks like some options were presented in front of us. I think everyone on council is in agreement to continue the conversations with our neighbors in Superior, Louisville, all of our, the other cities that are impacted, whether that be staff to staff or counselor to counselor. I mean, I don't see a reason to stop those conversations. And then the conversations with Jeffco as well, with the county commissioners and folks like that. I don't see a reason why we wouldn't continue those efforts.
Because they don't care.
Yeah, I mean, with the new county commissioners, maybe, right? Possibly, who knows? We don't need to get into that.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure it's worth our staff time to do something like that when we know that, as we just were explained, that it's the FAA that takes care of the air, and it's the airspace above Lafayette that's the issue, not the airspace above Rocky Mountain Airport. So if the commissioners are in charge of Rocky Mountain Airport and they can't control the airspace, they're not the ones that we should be talking to, as our council member has stated. We should be talking to FAA if that's what we want to do.
Well, I guess that's our discussion tonight then. I shouldn't assume where everyone is, and so let me hear council's thoughts. Do we want to continue these conversations locally, regionally, and do we want to enlist in the services of a consultant who's more of a subject matter expert in this area?
Can I, I'm going to do an option 4. Does anybody want to be on that airport advisory board?
It could be someone from like Louisville or Superior, correct? Or
Here's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at the board members. First, they have 8 on the board.
It's due in 6 days too, by the way. But it's not a long application, I'm just saying, we're looking for, sorry, keep going, please, I just want to give you that piece.
And my understanding, as I'm looking at it, the person that was at the adjacent jurisdiction is John Marriott, who was a city council member in Arvada. So that puts Jefferson County. Then they've got a resident property owner with the airport influence area. Then they have 2 Jefferson County citizen large. Then they have a business owner with airport influence area. They basically have everybody in Jefferson County. I would say if we can get somebody on this board from Boulder County, we get that person to say, you need a Boulder County representative on this board at all times. So it isn't just adjacent jurisdiction. And it sounds like they also need Broomfield and they also need Adams County to get Westminster in there.
But you just said, like, that's to control what's on the ground, which
But
is
you
not
can
what we're
get,
interested in.
they are also, this airport advisory board was the one that hired the consultant for the Part 150 plan. They're also the one that can say to the consultant, because it's an outside consultant, obviously, hey, we really want you to also take into effect this other community engagement. So they have control. That's the part I think we have control over. The Part 150 plan is a plan to combine data and public input and to develop something. If that comes out, whatever comes out of that result, that can actually influence what the FAA can do.
I agree, but the roundtable was basically a kangaroo court.
This is not the roundtable.
I know, I understand that. And maybe it's worth it. I just, after looking at the roundtable, maybe this is a better option. The roundtable was, I think we spent $18,000 on that.
Right.
We got 9,000 of that back, but all, like, Louisville's probably in for, small fortune on how much.
Do you have to pay to sit on the board?
Yeah.
This advisory board?
This one, I don't know.
Not that. I'm on the RMMA,
Right.
on the roundtable.
I agree, the roundtable. The roundtable was over here, their information would be presented, and I watched these airport advisory board meetings. They'd go, oh, that's nice, thanks. And then they'd move
Yeah,
on.
$91,000.
That's why I'm saying, I don't want a roundtable. I want somebody from Boulder County to get on that adjacent fill that gap, and get in there and start to make change from the inside. Listen to us, listen to people. That also being said, I'd like to say 2 comments. One, this Part 150, if you go online, at the very bottom, so it's RMMA Part 150study.com, click here to submit your public comments for the RMMA Part 150 Noise and Land Use Compatibility Study. And you can click into comments. So I'm saying that, not necessarily for you all, for everybody that's listening out there. Click on there right now, put your comments, and who cares if you do it every day? But that was one comment we just said, is how do we tell people? I'm gonna tell people, go there, right? The other thing that I've got here, just so I looked up quickly, Colorado has legislation to incentivize the transition to unleaded fuel. If you are an aircraft owner, you can get income tax credits to switch to using that. And the FAA is planning to, they've set a target of 2030 for requiring all airports to submit transition plans and to eliminate leaded aviation fuel. So to answer those questions.
All right, thank you. Let's hear from others on these items, where we stand. Yeah, Councilor Gallegos.
So since this is a matter of concern for members of our community, I do think we need to take action and move forward. I like the idea of moving forward with a consultant, but I was wondering if we could share the cost with another jurisdiction. Do you think Louisville or Broomfield even might want to consider going in on a study together and then using that data to impact change however we can?
I don't know if the timing is gonna be right. Louisville
Okay.
just did some work with the consultant, and I think they're sound like they're complete with that. And, I think other communities have talked to, at least we know one other community has talked to a consultant and decided not to engage further at this
Okay.
time, so I'm not sure. I mean, we can, we can check in with at least one other community, and then the two communities. I mean, Superior is still in litigation, and so they're kind of doing their own thing in Boulder County as well.
But the,
Yeah.
but the role of the consultant, if we were to go that route for us, would just be someone to reference when we do get these complaints, asking them to sit with RMMA and work with them to learn what we can do to not necessarily redirect flight paths, but to change the location of where these flight schools are taking place, change the frequency of the flights and the incentives that the airport could provide for I know the FAA is already providing some incentives as mentioned, but what could the airport do as well to switch to unleaded fuel, things like that, right? That would be the purpose of the consultant, or is that what the intention of the consultant would be? To
Well,
serve
I
in
think
that
that's
role?
a, sort of question for you all is how you would like to see something scoped. So I think what I'm, yeah.
The one of the legal ones that we talked to, like the legal consultant could give you the educational landscape talk. And then an operational consultant could be the one to look at how is the airport operating, what suggestions could you make to RMMA or evaluate their programs.
Also, almost like auditing it, sort of, in a way, and then, well, not. to
Like she had
that.
mentioned,
Yeah.
looking at their, how are their flight plans and flight paths, voluntary programs.
I think that we could get that from other municipalities, because that's been done, I would think.
Yeah.
And from the-
It maybe has.
And from the data pulled for
Superior's
the Part 150 study. So I don't know why you would hire a consultant to do the same thing that's being done right now by it.
I think we should go with the FAA, go straight to the FAA. I appreciate just what I've seen is everything points to the FAA gets to make the final call. And if we can talk directly with the FAA, with other communities, I think we should ask other municipalities to meet with us in the FAA and.
I think the issue with that is they're just not responsive.
Sorry?
The FAA is just not responsive.
They have to be, they're part of the government.
I don't, exactly. I just think that's the issue, historically, right? That we've run into, right? We've brought up these concerns. The roundtable brought up the concerns. Community members have. The FAA has their own portal to receive feedback from folks and doesn't go anywhere.
I'm not sure the roundtable ever brought up the concerns,
What members did, yeah.
but the roundtable itself.
Yeah, I think I guess it depends on who was on the board at the time, and which members, how the votes went, but.
I think the
But-
FAA told the community members to set up a roundtable.
Right, and yes.
Is
and-
what happened.
And then to
They brought a
deflect.
flyer.
Yeah, and
they
then
said,
just to be transparent,
This
yeah.
is what you should set up, is one of
Yeah.
these.
They
because
did that,
This is,
yeah.
this
So
is
it's-
what we want to see.
But then the issue with that was when residents did complain, they say, go to the round table, not to us. Right, so it's just deflecting, right? So, yeah, it's tough. But it sounds like, Councilor Barnes, then to where you're coming from is you'd like to collaborate with local municipalities, but in an effort to communicate with the FAA as a joint coalition.
Yeah, I don't know if Councilor Tapia Vega is that kind of what you?
Yeah, that's exactly where I am, yeah.
But I feel like we've already done that.
Well, it may be more like we could try to set I mean, we could try to do something with the FAA, we could try to set up a meeting, but that may be more like working with other communities with an advocacy, like a, you know, like a lobbying firm or someone who actually has those relationships with the people at the FAA who you can talk to, you know, about these matters, because
Who know the phone
yeah.
numbers to
Yeah,
call.
because I don't know that we would be able to just find the people that would pick up the phone for us, but.
Then in that case, can we just do both? Can the first part be the consulting and finding the right people to get us the right kind of path to get to the FAA eventually? So we don't have to do one or the other. We can do both. We can just kind of work our way into it. We can get the people with the right phone numbers to actually guide us into speaking to the FAA and maybe this time getting an answer.
And help us understand what to ask, right?
Yeah,
I think that's part of our challenge, is like, can we
Right.
offer flight routes or not? I mean, would they be open to that? Who needs to support it? I mean, helping us understand like what is a reasonable ask or an ask that they'll even entertain.
For me, the benefit of a consultant would be to have someone that's more of an expert in the issue, to take that off of staff's plate. So we can go directly to them and say, hey, what are the next steps to approaching this problem? So when we do get those email complaints, which we'll continue to get, we can actually have someone to call and to reference, you know.
Have we tried talking to National League of Cities? They should have some information to give us on who to contact in the FAA or how to contact them.
I don't believe we have.
Okay.
Could be a good resource as well. I'm not really seeing a consensus at this point, so I'm wondering what the best approach would be. If we should, were you earlier, you were suggesting that maybe we do reach out to a consultant, but just so that person can provide us with the next steps on how to set these conversations up for the future?
I think so. I think the clear plan of action for me is go to the FAA. It feels like we've kind of tried almost everything else and haven't directly gone to the FAA.
I believe we have.
Have we? Have we on record
And
gone
just
to
not
the
hearing
And the
that.
FAA is going to
Yeah.
answer, you need to get the Part 150 plan done. It's the same thing for every single federal agency. They're going to say, you have to get that done so that we can see the data, and then we can have a conversation with you. So that's why I keep saying, I think this is too early.
Okay.
You want to do a consultant, you get that data and you look at it. That's what I'm hearing. Everybody wants data. Get that data. If we want to talk to the airport to see if you can get that data earlier, that's why I asked the question when I went to the study, what's the timing on this? So I think it's going to be available in not the first quarter, but maybe second quarter of next year.
So this is another example why I think we need a consultant. Because my understanding of the Part 150 is they're going to set a boundary that's 65 TNL. That's the boundary. Within that boundary, certain things can apply that hit noise mitigation, right? I think, as Art said, we are not within the 65 DNL. We're not within the boundary.
Right.
So I think what that means for us is out of luck, right? Because really the Part 150 is to set it so we can do things within that boundary or not. So I would think that a consultant would help us, or staff can help us too, of like, what are our avenues now, and will the FAA, just to your point, tell us Part 150's got to finish before we're even willing to talk about this because we don't know what the boundary is? I think we can go to them and say, well, we're not going to be within, and so like, how do we get there through those toll gates, through those challenges, to actually make an ask, right? Because I mean, I agree with you. We're interested in Part 150. We want to watch it. We want to see the data, but my uneducated assumption is it's not going to actually help us, right? And so I don't know if that's true or not. That's just my assumption based on what I know of it so far. Which again, back to why I think having an expertise who has people have done it or been involved in Part 150s can help us understand that, help us understand the engagement with all parties involved, including flight schools, right? Flight schools are a key part here that we have not engaged at all. Other airports too, right? We're talking about RMMA, but the reason why we're in trouble is because we're part of a system where there's Longmont, there's Boulder, there's Erie, and so like we're right in the middle of all of those. And so how it all connects together to me is where we need to get to. And it's not just how can RMA fix it, but it's the system in this area and how all the players work together. So again, back to, that's really complicated. That's why expertise, I think, would be helpful for us in trying to navigate this, because we are in a unique, we're not superior, right? We're in a pretty unique situation. And so I think we do need expertise to help us figure out what do we have. Yes, sorry.
I think we have, I think in the deputy city attorneys and I's conversations with a few attorneys, one that we spoke with, I think it could be beneficial for us to have a session with you, with this attorney who would come in and provide sort of a landscape, answer some of these questions, and then we can decide if there's a need for sort of some of this on-call kind of assistance if things come up. And then I also think after that conversation, Councilmember Tapia Vega, and I think might have a better understanding of what leverage or what conversations we might want to have with FAA and what we might want to actually focus on if we do want to engage with FAA. And then if we feel like that's a good sort of immediate next step, then we can look at, one of these other sort of more lobbying consultants and get a little more information from them. And at that point, we could also have conversations with other communities to see if anyone else might want to participate in some engagement with that type of, partnership as well. And then we can kind of go from there.
And the person we have in mind is familiar with RMMA and has advised two other municipalities in the area about the issues that LUF is facing too.
Yeah.
And then I think at our Thursday meeting too, some of these questions about how is RMA contacting the FAA, right? Like we're talking with the county manager, Joe Kirby, as well as the commissioner. So I think that timing might, because they couldn't meet until after our meeting, it left a little of some unknowns, unfortunately, when we came into this meeting for it too. So I think we could have some solid next steps that doesn't necessarily kick the can down the road, but have a next kind of information sharing. And we could probably get that scheduled fairly timely.
Yeah.
I think that's fine. And then I think in addition to that, if none of us are able to submit an application for this advisory board here, we should make sure our colleagues in Louisville and Superior and adjacent municipalities are aware of that. So hopefully one of them can serve as our representative. We can also continue to collaborate with other elected officials and putting pressure on the FAA in any ways we can, potentially reaching out to NLC or other organizations, CML, one that's dealt with a similar issue in some capacity, to see what advice they have, and then continue to be involved in these Part 150 discussions. All things that we could be doing in the meantime. Yes.
Councilor Gallegos, I remember, I'm trying to remember what you wanted to do. Does that match?
That sounds great to me. I do think we're not the experts here, and we do need to consult with someone else who has these contacts and can do more than we have done.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll get something set up.
Maybe at a workshop or something, or maybe a council meeting, whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever works. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. It's not an easy topic to address. We appreciate the hard work and.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for your ideas and feedback. We appreciate it.
Great. Okay, just quickly before we do wrap up here, there is a new ideas section if anyone wants to bring anything up, but I did not hear anything from anyone beforehand. We also are running a little bit late, so, but if there's anything urgent, if not, there's obviously next month as well. Bring up these issues. Okay, great. All right, thank you all so much for today's discussion. We'll adjourn the meeting and see you all next time.